Mr. Speaker, the situation presents serious risks to British interests in the region. Having moved in additional assets on a precautionary basis, force protection is at its highest levels. Be in no doubt, we are prepared to defend our personnel, our assets, and those of our allies and partners. We are closely monitoring how energy markets are responding to the conflict, and we have been extremely clear with the Iranians. Any action to blockade the Straits of Hormuz would be a monumental act of economic self-harm, making a diplomatic solution even harder. Mr. Speaker, we are also maintaining sharp focus on other conflicts in the region. First and foremost, the catastrophic plight of Gazans and the ongoing ordeal of the hostages and their loved ones, all fearing that this war leaves them forgotten. Today I met Ali Sharabi, held in chains by Iranian-backed terrorists, who was released from Hamas captivity only to discover they had murdered his family. Last week, Israeli Defense Forces recovered the bodies of 2 hostages, as well as that of Shai Levinson, an Israeli and British family killed on October the 7th, which Hamas has been cruelly keeping from their loved ones. And Palestinian civilians, 500,000 facing starvation, over 400 reportedly killed in recent weeks trying to access food, while Gazan hospitals have had to stop services vital for childbirth and emergency surgeries. This is appalling, Mr. Speaker. It's unacceptable and it must finally end. The Israeli government must lift aid restrictions, Hamas must release all the hostages. An immediate ceasefire has never been more urgent. Mr. Speaker, the consequences of the current situation are hard to predict. History can offer us no guide after events unprecedented in the region. The government has sought to react quickly to the twists and turns of recent weeks while maintaining focus on where British interests lie. A lasting end to Iran's nuclear programme, a de-escalation of tensions, and security for our people across the region. We will continue to persevere with diplomacy. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State Dame Priti Patel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago, the IAEA produced a report that was damning on the Iranian regime. Iran was not cooperating, breaching its obligations, and had over 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%, far beyond any level needed for a civilian nuclear program, and enough material to create at least 9 nuclear devices. Their nuclear facilities are buried deep underground to hide their program, and all this from a despotic, authoritarian regime that represses and tortures its own people. It's committed to the annihilation of Israel, the world's only Jewish state, and is responsible for so much of the suffering in the region through its sponsorship of terrorist proxies. It is supporting Putin in its illegal war against Ukraine and is involved in plots and activities to undermine our national security here at home on a daily basis. Mr. Speaker, it is for these reasons and many, many more that the Iranian regime must never be allowed to have nuclear weapons. That is why we stand with those working to stop them. As His Majesty's opposition, the House will know that we will always put the defence and security of our country first. And that's why we will work constructively with the government to secure the protection of British people and our national interests. We will support the government when they're doing the right thing, but also question, challenge and press ministers to go further when we think more needs to be done to safeguard our interests. It is in that spirit of constructive scrutiny, in the national interest, that I put these questions and points to the Foreign Secretary. Firstly, British nationals and dual nationals continue to be stranded in Israel and the Middle East due to airbase closures. Now, I've written to the Foreign Secretary about this matter and note the progress with today's flight, and I do want to thank the Foreign Office for the work they've been doing with many families who I've been in touch with as well, who have been able to get on that flight today. So can the Foreign Secretary tell us how many British nationals may need to be repatriated? What resources are being deployed to support those efforts? Is there enough capacity to match the numbers that is needed to leave? And why does it seem that the US and other European countries were ahead of us in their operational planning to bring back their citizens? The Foreign Secretary has mentioned the US Embassy advice, and now he's given advice to British nationals in Qatar today. Will there be any further notifications for other British nationals in GCC states? Second, on Iran's nuclear programme, the Foreign Secretary on radio this morning could not say how effective the weekend strikes were, and I understand that will take time to get information. But if more strikes are planned to further degrade Iran's nuclear capacities, will the government consider supporting these? The government has not taken a clear position on the actions that the US and Israel have taken, but we have seen reports of the apparent legal advice from the Attorney General cautioning against UK involvement. And while I appreciate that the Foreign Secretary cannot comment on any legal advice, does the government have a position on the lawfulness of these strikes? And does he welcome the ends as well as the means to achieve this? Does he share my cynicism about Iran's attempt to cloak itself in the UN Charter? That's the same UN Charter it has undermined with its brutality for decades. And can the Foreign Secretary confirm if the US will be permitted to take action from Diego Garcia should future strikes on Iran be needed or actions to defend Israel? Or does the government think that there are legal barriers to the US in doing so? Third, with heightened tensions in the region, can the Foreign Secretary give an update on what further steps are being undertaken to safeguard British military assets in the region and our partners from any unwise military action taken by the Iranian regime? And I say this considering the reports that we heard about over the weekend with the arrest of a suspected Iranian spy plot targeting our base in Cyprus. Are we now stepping up efforts to protect bases? Fourth, what steps are being taken across government and with our police, counter-terrorism, security services to reassess the domestic threat levels? The Foreign Secretary cannot go into operational details, so can he give assurance on the robust action and disruptions to any potential Iran-backed plots that are underway? He mentioned, and rightly so, the issue of Gaza and the fact that we absolutely must work together in terms of ensuring that humanitarian aid gets to people desperately in need of aid. Can the Foreign Secretary update us on what steps he's been taking to engage with Israel to get more aid into Gaza? And does he agree that Iran must be weakened to end their ability to sponsor Hamas and other terrorists in the region?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm very grateful, Mr. Speaker, to the tone and the cooperative context in which the Honourable Lady has made her remark, and quite rightly she has a number of questions which I will attempt to answer. But let me just begin by saying, fundamentally, we are in agreement that Iran and the regime in Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, and all of our efforts are designed to ensure that that is the case. And the whole House will understand that this is not just about Iran, the region and global security. It is because we have to remain steadfast in our commitment to not see nuclear proliferation. And if Iran got a nuclear weapon, clearly there would be others in the region that would seek to follow. And so it's a sober commitment that really begins 80 years ago that we must see to completion in relation of their ambitions. She asks about the British nationals in Israel. There are just over 4,000 British nationals that have registered their interests following our appeal last week. And we would estimate that somewhere between 15 to 25% of them indicate, this is following the pattern in previous crises in Israel and in the region, take up the offer of British assistance to leave. As she knows, the airspace has been closed, and so that offer up until this point was about getting them to the border. But I'm very pleased that that flight has landed and taken off. We hope to work with the Israeli government on further flights in the area. My understanding is that there has been a military plane that the Americans have put on for their citizens from Israel, but she will understand the uniqueness of the relationship that the United States has with America that facilitated that opening up, and I'm very pleased that we have been able to garner that same agreement today with the Israeli government. This is an ongoing and fast-moving situation. She has heard what I have advised British nationals in Qatar today, and of course we keep this under close review, and there may need to be further updates over the course of the next few days. It was important that I was in Washington, D.C., sitting with the US administration, and in that meeting with Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff last week, it was very clear to me that all options were on the table, and President Trump had those options in front of us. I, of course, discussed with them in detail the trip that I would be making alongside my French, German, and the European High Representative in Geneva, and they were keen and hopeful that that might be successful. It was not successful. But we continue to press the Iranians to take the off-ramp and get into those negotiations with the United States and with the E3 to ensure that they are in compliance. She asks about the legal advice. That must rightly be a matter for the US government in relation to their action. And I'm pleased that she mentioned the ministerial code. She will know that Section 213 of the Ministerial Code prevents those of us in government, and she has been in government in the past, discussing legal advice so that government can operate in the appropriate way. But I would say to her, this was not our action. We have been clear that we were not involved. She asked also whether we had any request from the US government. We did not get such a request, but we were notified before the action took place. She asked also about state threats, and it is right to say that we have thwarted 20 such state threats since 2022 in this country, and she will know, including the highest tier that we put Iran on for national interference, that we take the threats from Iran very seriously, and we are reviewing and will come forward with legislation in the coming months in relation to the gaps that Sir John Hall found in how we deal with state threats in our country.
The Select Committee, Dame Emily Thornberry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The only way to stop Iran from building a nuclear bomb is a deal. There cannot be a deal without negotiations, and there cannot be negotiations without trust. And given that President Trump tore up the first nuclear deal and is now acting alongside Israel, whose attack last week ended the US-Iran negotiations for a new nuclear deal, and given that the war aims of this campaign are so unclear, an emboldened Netanyahu government is calling for a regime change, and President Trump is hinting at it too, it can be difficult to see how in all those circumstances there can be negotiations based on trust. Yes. Does the Foreign Secretary agree that Britain must continue to play a role in these negotiations, even though they must seem an incredibly difficult and challenging prospect?
Yeah. Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, for her question. And it goes to the heart of where the UK should be at this time. And that is at the centre of the diplomatic effort. A diplomatic effort that will be necessary at the end of this process. Because sadly, once you have the ability to enrich uranium to 60%, that knowledge is not lost. It is the stepping stone to an advanced weapon, and therefore only a diplomatic solution and the correct framework can ensure that we keep the global community safe.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also thank the Foreign Secretary for the advanced sight of his statement. On these benches, Mr. Speaker, we share in the condemnation of an Iranian regime that poses an existential threat to Israel and has terrorised its own people as surely as citizens from other countries around the world, including the UK. That is why we support the consensus in this House that Iran can never be allowed to have nuclear weapons. Yet it is not clear that military action by Israel and the US can provide the long-term lock on Iran's nuclear ambitions which we need. Following this weekend's strike, it is reported that Iran will work at pace to develop weapons with what remains of their enriched uranium supplies. This should give pause to those on the Conservative and Reform benches who have breathlessly echoed President Trump's line that these strikes have been an unrivalled success. For instead of bringing security, Trump and Netanyahu's unilateral actions have increased uncertainty and the risk of a full-scale regional war. Their belief that might is right both further erodes the rule-based international order and undermines the prospects of containing Iran and other rogue states in the long term. This is not in the UK's interest. That is why Liberal Democrats have called consistently for the application of robust diplomacy, supported by IAEA monitoring and grounded in international law, as the only sustainable way permanently to limit Iran's nuclear ambitions. Our immediate priority must now be to ensure the safety and support of British nationals in the region, learning the lessons of unacceptable delays on previous occasions. So I ask the Foreign Secretary, why has it taken over a week since the start of strikes to begin repatriating Britons from Israel? And what more is being done to support those in the wider region who want to leave? The government has also remained silent on the legality of this conflict, Mr. Speaker. Will the Foreign Secretary now commit to publishing the Attorney General's advice on whether any UK involvement in this conflict would constitute a breach of international law? And will he confirm that this House will be given a vote before any decision for the UK to enter this conflict?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree with the honourable gentleman and the thrust of his remarks, which are around diplomacy and the need for diplomacy at this time. And he's absolutely right about the malign intent of the IRGC and the Iranian regime, whose desire is to wipe Israel off the map, and we must stand up to that pernicious ideology. Our attempts are to gain de-escalation, and I would remind him that just yesterday Vice President Vance has said that delaying the development of a nuclear weapon was the goal. We're at war with Iran's nuclear program. We're not at war with the Iranian people. And it's important to keep that in his mind's eye. He asks about British nationals. He's heard what I said about the airspace being closed. I'm pleased that that first flight has taken off. And I would remind him also that successive UN resolutions, Resolution 2231, particularly, I would refer him to, in relation to this long-standing breach. He asks about the legal advice. He's heard my comments on the legal advice. We were not involved. This is not our legal context. And he asks about publishing the AGs. That might have been appropriate if we were involved, but I don't think it is. But we're not involved, and so there's no such advice to publish.
Dan Cardle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I welcome the Foreign Secretary's calls to move this to a negotiated solution and his focus on UK defence and security. He's right, Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon. However, history also teaches us on the issue of regime change that interventions aimed at regime change in Iraq, in Libya, in Afghanistan have produced prolonged instability, not just in the region but far wider. So what concrete lessons does he believe can be learned from this recent history in shaping Iran policy today?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, but he'll forgive me. I'm not going to enter into a history lesson from the dispatch box, except to remind him that on Sunday I achieved 25 years as an elected parliamentarian, and during the course during the course of that period, of course, there has been debates about regime change. But I'd also remind him that the US has been clear that their attention is to target the nuclear threat, and we should keep that in mind.
Sir James Cleverly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Foreign Secretary, concede now that the international community's unwillingness to take robust action through things like snapback and the JCPOA mechanism is part of the reason why Israel felt the need to take the initial strikes and for America to do likewise? I agree that ultimately diplomatic means will be the only long-term resolution to this, but that's not just about asking nicely for Iran to put its nuclear weapons away. It is about enforcing them and making sure they do through mechanisms. So will he ensure that if we're not going to be involved in military action, I understand the reason why we might not want to do that, we will ensure robust action is taken underpinned by things that will force Iran to do the right thing rather than just hoping that they will do the right thing.
For his secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman, and I know that he knows how difficult it is dealing with Iran. He will remember that under JCPOA, they were allowed to enrich to 3.67%. 3.67. And today, they're at 60%. And the question is, how could that possibly be for civilian use? And I challenged the foreign minister from Iran about this on Friday. We've had 7 rounds of negotiations with the Iranians, and those rounds begun under his government, and he would have been Foreign Secretary for a period when those begun, and they have obfuscated, they have deceived, and the time now is to get real.
Uma Kumran.
Speaker, can the Foreign Secretary assure this House that the escalating conflict in Iran, where we all want to see urgent de-escalation, will not take focus from the UK's efforts to end the devastating war in Gaza, to help the Palestinian people, to free the hostages and lift restrictions on humanitarian and medical aid?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. The loss of life over the last few days, hundreds of people who've lost their lives queuing for food is appalling and should offend us all. And of course, when I spoke to Israel's foreign minister yesterday, I reminded him once again about my deep concerns about the new system that Israel has put in place to deliver aid, and our belief that that system will not work, and we need to return to a much better provision.
Afra Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary has said that Iran must not be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. So does he therefore support the recent targeted strikes by the United States and Israel on Iranian nuclear facilities, yes or no? And if not, can he explain how exactly that inaction would have curtailed Iran's nuclear ambitions?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm afraid I'm not able to give an assessment at this stage of the effectiveness of that action, and neither is the United States. And the Honourable Lady may think that that is a binary question. I don't believe it is a binary question. What the UK is engaged in is diplomacy, and working, of course, with our closest ally, the United States.
Blair McNoon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with this condemnation of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, but ask that we need condemnation to be matched with accountability. Here in the UK, Jewish communities in particular are deeply concerned at the moment about what lies ahead. Last week at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, the Iranian ambassador acknowledged that MI5 had identified 23 threats on British soil organised by the Iranian regime. What's his message to Jewish communities who are on a state of high alert at the moment, wondering what will happen?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his question. He's right that the Iranian regime is the world's worst sponsor of state terrorism and state threats. We have individuals, 3 that have been arrested under our National Security Act, currently moving through our judicial system. And I would want to reassure those in the Jewish community in our country that we take those threats very seriously. And I, working alongside the Home Secretary, will do all we can to keep them, their buildings, their institutions, their families safe.
Sir Julian Lewis.
As usual, I agree with much of what the Foreign Secretary has to say, but I do have to ask him, how many times must a terrorist-funding, fanatical regime threaten to wipe another country from the face of the earth before a government advised by Lord Hermer of Chagos acknowledges that military action to delay and degrade its nuclear weapons program is both ethically and legally justifiable?
Foreign Secretary.
I simply say to the right honourable gentleman, and I say this with all respect, there is a convention in our country about the very important role that Attorney Generals play in our government, able to give government advice when asked for. It happens under all governments, and I don't really recognise the caricature that I've heard or some of the reports. And I want to make it crystal clear, we were not involved in this action, and therefore, really, some of what's being said is wholly beyond the pale.
Up to Sam Mohammed.
Many of my constituents have contacted me over the weekend, fearful of the fallout of US intervention in Iran. They know, and we know, that wars do not make the world a safer place, but much more dangerous. Their concerns are not unwarranted. In 2002, Netanyahu offered a guarantee that regime change in Iraq would bring enormous positive reverberations to the region. But we now know that there was no imminent threat, and there were no evidence of weapons. The scale of the disaster, not just in Iraq but across the region, was so profound that the Chilcot inquiry insisted any future military intervention must be met with rigorous scrutiny. Does the Foreign Secretary accept this scrutiny, and will he again provide reassurance to the House that we will not enter an endless war fuelled by provocative, reckless provocateurs?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and just to say to her, I was in the House during that period in which Chilcot was making his work, and of course I'd want to reassure her that our government, and I hope all future governments here in the UK, have learnt from its findings.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary has confirmed that Britain was not involved in the strikes on Iran. Will he also confirm whether or not the US administration sought permission to use Diego Garcia as the launch point for these strikes? If it was sought and was denied, on what basis did the Prime Minister deny permission? And if it wasn't sought, what does it say about the UK-US relationship that America would rather fly around the world from Missouri than launch from Diego Garcia?
Foreign Secretary.
They did not seek that advice.
Elise Ballinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Foreign Secretary for his measured approach to this crisis. In past rounds of violence, Iran has often lent on its proxies to conduct retaliation. That includes the Houthis of Yemen, who up until recently have been attacking UK and international shipping in the Red Sea. Can I ask the Foreign Secretary what steps he is taking to protect UK shipping in that area and to keep those trade routes that are so vital for our country safe?
Foreign Secretary.
We have seen that Iran's proxies have been considerably degraded over this period. Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis held back, but still active in the Red Sea. And we will do all we can, working with partners, to protect our shipping routes. And we have been crystal clear to the Iranian regime about the Strait of Hormuz, particularly.
Sir John Whittingdale.
When the Foreign Affairs Committee met the Iranian ambassador twice last week, he claimed that the Iranian nuclear program was legal and purely civil, and he said that they wanted to negotiate. Can the Foreign Secretary say, on the basis of his numerous meetings that he has reported with the Iranian Foreign Minister, whether he gained any impression of Iran's willingness either to dismantle their nuclear program or to negotiate?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm very grateful for the Right Honourable Gentleman's question. It's the central question. And what I have found is inflexibility and a failure to face the seriousness with which the international community are looking at this question, to accept that we've moved on from the JCPOA, which they pulled out of back in 2019, that the focus now is on zero enrichment. Maybe they can have a civil nuclear capability, but it would have to be heavily monitored and would have to have some sort of international regime, I suspect, to be in locus with it. They have to face that seriousness now at this point.
Florence Echelon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement this afternoon. And the Foreign Secretary said that I know the whole House will have in their thoughts the many civilians impacted by this fighting. I have in my thoughts the many protesters who took to the streets after the brutal and tragic killing of Mahsa Amini in 2002, September 2002. We saw those protesters coming forward, standing up against the brutal regime, and we saw people be mutilated. And the last 20 years of intervention has shown that war and wider escalation will not help these people. It will not help the ordinary Iranians who are suffering under this regime. I've received many emails from my constituents, Mr. Speaker. My constituents said the priority should be to negotiate a peaceful resolution to the conflict and not supplying weapons to either side of the conflict. Further, to support the facilitation of aid to civilians impacted by this war. Can the Foreign Secretary assure me that the UK will not act immediately to follow in on any military action, and we will urge the US and Israel to de-escalate and to avoid targeting innocent civilians?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for mentioning Mahsa Amini, a young woman imprisoned in Iran because of her appearance, killed in police custody, 20,000 people, many of them who protested, thrown in jail as a result, and 500 who effectively were murdered and lost their lives. That's the regime that we're talking about, and she's quite right to remind the House about that this afternoon. And I would refer her to the statements I previously made about our position on diplomacy.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For a lot of people watching and worrying over the weekend, they'll have seen many of the hallmarks of Iraq. Yet, despite that, the Foreign Secretary can't tell us whether he believes these strikes were the right thing to do or not. The Foreign Secretary can't tell us whether he believes that these strikes were legal or not. And the Foreign Secretary has failed today to outline whether this House would be given a vote on any potential military action in this conflict. Is he purposely treating the public as fools?
Foreign Secretary.
I've got to say to the honourable gentleman, he may just have got a soundbite, but I'm really on the nuclear question. I'm not going to take lecturing from the honourable gentleman. I'm afraid he's got a very sorry record in relation to that very serious matter. We have been very clear that diplomacy is the way, that de-escalation is our position, That's what you pursue if you're serious about foreign policy, and I'd recommend our approach to the Honourable Gentleman.
Mr. Speaker, may I first join the Foreign Secretary in thanking our brave service personnel from RAF Prize Norton for repatriating British citizens back from Tel Aviv. On this Armed Forces Week, I think we are all grateful for their courage and sacrifice. On Iran, let's be clear about the regime. It has killed thousands upon thousands, upheld brutal suppression of democracy, rights of women and LGBT plus people. It has demonstrated a consistent intent to sponsor terrorism and act through proxies and with violence in order to destabilise the region. But all military action must go through the process of international law, and it must be executed based on a plan and intent to return to democracy. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that we must do what we can to support de-escalation as soon as possible?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his service in the RAF, and I'm sure he's thinking about former colleagues at RAF Akrotiri and across our 2 sovereign bases in this area, and about our bilateral defence partnership with so many countries in the region particularly. And I'm very pleased to make it crystal clear that the path through this is a diplomatic one, is for Iran to return back to negotiation and to recognise the power of the global community being absolutely clear. They cannot have a nuclear weapon.
Bob Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's good news that the Home Secretary has finally decided, reportedly, to prescribe the treacherous terrorist group Palestinian Action. Now, given that she's done that at great speed after the attack recently, and the IRGC have conducted attacks or attempted attacks on this country multiple times, will he now use his powers to persuade the Home Secretary to prescribe the IRGC in its entirety?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, and the prescription question is always an issue for the Home Secretary. In the decision that she's made today, it's important to stress that it's a process involving all the relevant agencies and their assessment in the activities. But I have to say the attack on RAF bases is disgraceful and totally unacceptable, and the force of the law must bear down on it. She keeps prescription under review. I know it's a long-standing issue that the honourable gentleman has raised.
Jessica Moore.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for this statement and acknowledge, like many constituents have this week, the intense diplomatic efforts of his teams in ever-changing and ever-challenging times. But I know they will also want to be reassured, given the absolutely intolerable situation in Gaza, that we will not let up on pressing in absolutely every way we can for more aid to get through and for an immediate ceasefire. And I know the Foreign Secretary said this last week and this week today at the statement, but please could he underline that again?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and this morning I sat in my office with Eli Sharabi, who managed to get out of a Hamas cell, but lost many family members during that journey. And he talked about the starvation that he experienced, going down to 44 kilograms after being 70 when he went in. It was humbling to hear his story, and to be reminded that the humanitarian catastrophe affected everyone in Gaza. But he did say that the Hamas who were holding him ate plentiful while they watched him and others with him starve.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that there's a consensus across, I think, the whole House that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon, it seems to me there's a sort of a lack of willingness to recognise when negotiations after many years have patently failed to yield results. So will the Foreign Secretary join Reform and myself in thanking the United States and Israel for degrading the Iranian nuclear weapons programme?
Well, I had 2 conversations with Secretary of State Rubio yesterday, and I hope he would say that we've established a very good working relationship over that period, and he will know that I have a long-standing or longer-standing relationship with Vice President Vance. And to be clear, the United States position is that we are at war with Iran's nuclear program. This was a targeted attack, and it's important to understand their efforts to degrade, but we have not yet had that assessment as to its effectiveness.
Richard Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Iraq showed the grave dangers of following a right-wing US president into an illegal war for a regime change. The consequences were hundreds of thousands of dead, mass destruction, mass devastation, regional chaos and wasted resources. Many fear that the same thing is happening now. So will the Foreign Secretary confirm that any such war on Iran for regime change would be illegal under international law? And will the Foreign Secretary confirm that he would oppose in UK involvement in any such intervention, in any such war?
Foreign Secretary. Confident in my engagement with the United States and the discussions that I've had, including those in the White House last week, that this is not about regime change. And I should remind the honourable gentleman that the Israelis too have been clear that they are not attacking the civilian leadership in Iran.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It does appear that the House agrees with the government's objective that Iran should never have nuclear weapons, but the government is prepared to will the ends, but not the means. And it begs the question about who is really running the government. Why did Lord Homer's opinion on the legality of military action or UK involvement become public last week? Was it leaked? Was it briefed? And doesn't it demonstrate that the government is paralysed and divided over this question instead of leading from the front?
Foreign Secretary.
No.
Laura Kirk-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I commend the Foreign Secretary for urging calm and restraint at this troubling time. I know he's been engaging with European counterparts, notably France and Germany as the E3. But as the positions of the US and Israel and Iran harden, does the Foreign Secretary agree with me that this is a moment where our relationship with Europe as a collective force for diplomacy and peace is going to be crucial?
Foreign Secretary.
I was very grateful to my honourable friend. It was important for the so-called E3, the United Kingdom, alongside Germany and France, working with the EU's High Representative to make clear our concerns about Iran's nuclear ambitions to the Iranian forum and urge him to come back to diplomacy. And then all of us were on the phone to him again after the action. Of course, there's an important role for Europe, particularly as the custodians of the JCPOA, and because we have a decision to make about whether we will in fact snap back and impose a heavy set of sanctions on Iran if they fail to comply.
Ellen Maguire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week and today, the Foreign Secretary said that the government's first priority is the welfare of British nationals, and I welcome this. Yet, my constituent, who was caught in Iran with her baby, received unfortunately no support from the Foreign Office and had to plead with officials at the port to evacuate to Oman. This was not a secure route, and another ferry was bombed along the way. She and her baby are now thankfully safe, but still seeking their way back to the UK without their luggage or any provisions for their baby. Can the Foreign Secretary outline what steps are being taken to ensure British nationals, like my constituent, can be repatriated swiftly and safely if they so wish?
Secretary.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear about the position of her constituent and her baby. It must have been immensely stressful to make your way out of Iran in this way. She will know that we have been advising against travel to Iran since 2019. We are able to offer support on the border with Azerbaijan as best we can. But she will also know that the airspace is not open in Iran. But if she writes or is in touch with my honourable friend, the Middle East Minister, of course we'll look at it and what learnings there may be.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
First of all, I'd like to associate myself with the remarks about condolences to everyone that's lost loved ones. But, Mr. Speaker, we're increasingly seeing foreign leaders both flout international law, but also ignore our international rules-based system, one very hard after the Second World War. So, what is my right honourable friend doing to ensure that we can get this back on track?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for the question. It was very appropriate to meet with the Iranian Foreign Minister in Geneva. In so many ways, the home under the United Nations umbrella of the multilateral system and the rules-based order. And that is why we were with him as the E3 and as the EU to reinforce messages that we share with the United States and to try and broker, and we will keep trying, a diplomatic solution.
Jim Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, the Foreign Secretary was repeatedly asked if he considered the US's bombing of Iran to be legal. Now, while I'm sure everyone in this House recognises the brutality of the Iranian regime, his obfuscation in reply was clear, as is the refusal to say whether Britain would get involved in any capacity if the US falls deeper into a conflict with Iran. Can we have a clear answer from the Foreign Secretary now to that question? And can he clearly state that de-escalation must mean no UK involvement?
Foreign Secretary.
Can I just say to the honourable gentleman, we have UK nationals in the region. We have UK bases in the region and force protection that is its highest level. We have several thousand troops in the region. Of course their welfare is our priority. Of course we've moved assets in a precautionary way into the area. And of course we will work alongside our allies to protect them and to protect our people. I can give him that assurance wholeheartedly.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we all share the concern of the Foreign Secretary to get back to how do we end the horrors that we are seeing in Gaza and a clarity about the dangerous risks that Iran presents. But that also means that we need to ask some difficult questions about how we get the negotiations going. Now, we've seen today that the Israeli forces have deliberately targeted the Evin prison in Tehran. It was the prison in which Nazim Zahawi Redcliffe was held. So what conversations has he had with the Israeli government about whether they are now moving to target non-military installations, and what does he think that would mean for the ability of negotiations to restart?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm grateful to my honourable. Can I reassure her that I spoke to the Israeli Foreign Minister yesterday. I spoke to him briefly again this morning, and he reassured me that the targets, that the military targets, the nuclear facility, remains their objective and their focus at this time.
Kit Walters.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Away from the headlines, as the Foreign Secretary said, hundreds of Gazans have been losing their lives. And let's be clear about what's happening. As tens of thousands of people daily walk miles to beg for food from American mercenaries, they're being shot at random in the street. Now, I think we've moved beyond in this House as asking the Foreign Secretary to actually lift a finger beyond mouthing the words to do anything about this. But I have a wider question. Does he envisage that the UK will play any sort of part in there being some sort of consequence in the future for these outright murders?
Foreign Secretary.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, and I know the strength of feeling that he has on these issues and the consistency with which he has pressed these issues from the backbenches, can I reassure him that in the White House last week we did not just discuss the situation in Israel and Iran. I also discussed the situation in Gaza, and our discussion was about the chances of a ceasefire. The prospects of that ceasefire are currently with Hamas. deep in their system and in their tunnels. But I remain hopeful that we will get a breakthrough in the coming days and weeks, and that the suffering that we are seeing is alleviated.
I'm aiming for 5 o'clock so we can speed up question and answer. Very helpful, a good example. Louise Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When there was US offensive action against Iran 5 years ago, we saw proxy action taken against UK and US personnel deployed in the Middle East, where we sadly lost Lance Corporal Brodie Gillen. I don't expect the Foreign Secretary to give me details, but can he assure me that everything's being done to make sure that there is adequate force protection for those who are still deployed on behalf of this country?
Foreign Secretary.
Very grateful to the Honourable Lady for asking that question, and to give that reassurance, our highest levels of force protection to all our wonderful personnel, many of whom I've met, who are in the region.
Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement and also for emphasising the importance of restraint and de-escalation at this very perilous moment. But can I ask him what steps he's taking to try to align and coordinate his diplomatic efforts with those of our European and G7 allies in the hope of presenting this united diplomatic front?
Secretary.
Grateful for the question. I have spoken, of course, to our G7 allies over the course of the last few weeks. I've spoken to our partners in the region, the Levant, as well as the Gulf, particularly, and I will continue to do all I can. And obviously, NATO in the coming days will be another forum in which we can reach a common path towards diplomacy.
As the Member of Parliament for the largest Jewish school in Europe, can I thank the Foreign Secretary for the assurances that he gave earlier on the community in this country being safeguarded. Can I also commend the way in which he has diligently pursued a negotiated outcome to this destabilised situation. He knows that it used to be said that the Israeli Prime Minister jumped to the tune of America. Now that it seems to be the other way round, what action will he take against Prime Minister Netanyahu specifically in order to stop the destabilisation of the Middle East?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful for the honourable gentleman's question. We do have disagreements with the government of Israel, and he knows that a few weeks ago we sanctioned 2 members of that government. But I remain, and the government remains, a friend of Israel, able to work at many different levels. And we recognise the contribution that has been made at this time to the degrading of proxies working on behalf of Iran, recognising that those proxies contribute to Iran being the worst actor on state threats globally.
David Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Iran chooses to close the Straits of Hormuz, which the Iranian Parliament have now voted to do, what contingency options has the Foreign Secretary worked up to protect UK national interests?
Or can I assure him that these issues are, of course, under consideration in the government? All contingencies are in place, and we are in discussion with our allies about that, but it would be wrong for me to go into operational detail.
Clive Lewis.
Can I associate myself with the comments made across the House about the dire and despicable nature of the Iranian regime? But that said, last week the Foreign Secretary told the House that attacks on Iran were not in our national interest. So does he believe the strikes led by Trump and Netanyahu, 2 hard-right authoritarians with no love for a rules-based order, have made Britain or the world any safer? Or does he agree with me that for much of the world watching, the message is chillingly clear? In a global order where rules mean little and might makes right, deterrence, not diplomacy, is now the only defence. And that, as he must acknowledge, makes global security more precarious than ever.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I recall that my honourable friend also recognises the problems of that nuclear threat and nuclear proliferation. An assessment has not been made yet of the effectiveness of that military action. But he will have heard my remarks in relation to diplomacy. That is the way now, and it will be the way when we get beyond this current crisis.
Brendan Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've been here for an hour, and still the Foreign Secretary appears incapable of saying whether he supports or condemns America's actions, or whether he regards them as being legal or not. And nowhere in this statement does the role of international law even merit a mention. So will the Foreign Secretary take this opportunity now to tell us whether he believes that America's unilateral action was compliant with international law?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I've got to tell the honourable gentleman, I qualified and was called to the bar in 1995. I haven't practised for the last 25 years. It is not for me to comment on the United States' legal validity. I would refer him to Article 51 and Article 2 of the UN Charter, and he can seek his own advice.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend is right to focus on de-escalation and diplomacy. However, we know that the JCPOA did not curtail Iran's enrichment of uranium. So what learning will he take as he rebuilds the architecture for diplomacy to ensure that Iran cannot rebuild its nuclear enriched uranium?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. With Iran enriching at 60% and the IEA saying that it has no credible civilian justification for this high enrichment level, she's quite right. And therefore the debate has moved on, and it's moved on to zero enrichment.
Sir Gavin Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Foreign Secretary make it clear to the House that if the United States needs to take further action to degrade and destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities, and if they request to use either Diego Garcia, Cyprus or any other British military facility, that we will make sure that that is available to them?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that in my discussions with the United States and with Secretary of State Rubio, and I think he saw this from the thrust of the press conference that was held in the United States yesterday, that is not their intention. He will know that they are assessing now what has happened, and they are hoping that it has been a targeted response, a single response. That is the thrust of what we're being told by the United States at this time.
John Crime.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement. I understand the priority to evacuate UK citizens from Israel, but advice to our constituents Qatar to shelter in place until further notice is hardly comforting. Can I press the Foreign Secretary to outline what more detail will do for UK citizens in the wider region and whether there is a specific threat against them?
Foreign Secretary.
The message that I gave earlier at the dispatch box is in the context of a fast-moving situation, an advice that was given by the US shortly before standing up. Of course, we keep our advice updated, and we are on high alert right across the region.
Alton.
Mr. Speaker, what is UK government policy on whether regime change should be pursued in Iran, yes or no?
Foreign Secretary.
I said that in talking to Secretary of State Rubio, in talking to Vice President Vance, in talking to Envoy Steve Witkoff, that is not the objective of the United States. And of course, it is not our belief that it's for us to change the regime of any country, that it must be for the people themselves.
Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's absolutely right to call for de-escalation at this extremely dangerous time. However, the Foreign Secretary will know that the United States attack on Iran has raised serious questions if it was a violation of international law. Israel's genocide in Gaza and its occupational settlements in the West Bank is of course also illegal under international law. So can the Foreign Secretary tell me if the government still professes to believe in the international rules-based order, or are we now admitting we are content to support countries who act outside it?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'd refer the honourable gentleman to what I said in the chamber this afternoon. Of course we believe in the rules-based order and international law. That was precisely why I was in Geneva on Friday for 7 hours, attempting to get Iran to comply and get back around the negotiating table.
Jeremy Corbett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning on the radio, the Foreign Secretary told us of his adherence and support for the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and used that as an argument for the bombardment of Iran. Has he said anything to Israel about its illegal holding of nuclear weapons, its possession of a delivery system, and obviously the danger to anybody if there is a nuclear-armed neighbour who may well use them? What has he actually said to the government of Israel about their nuclear weapons?
Foreign Secretary.
I want to recognise that the Right Honourable Gentleman has been campaigning on these issues over many, many years and has taken strong positions on nuclear proliferation. I don't want to go back to the days of Mordecai Vanunu, but I would just remind him, Israel is not threatening its neighbours with nuclear weapons. It's Iran that we must stop at this time.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend believe that the attacks on Iran are beneficial to this country, or will they create more instability in the Middle East and beyond? And is there a cost to the UK as an upholder of the rules-based international order, which he says that we still support, if the actions of our allies, the United States and Israel, are judged to be contrary to international law?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and I know he's learned in these matters, and he will have strong views. What I can say to him is that we are seeking de-escalation, we are pursuing diplomacy, and we are doing that according to the rules-based order and our belief in the international architecture that was set up on the backs of men and women who lost their lives and gave so much in the Second World War.
Harriet Ball.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary has referred a number of times to the diplomatic off-ramp. So can he confirm to the House that the diplomatic off-ramp, the request of the United Kingdom to Iran, is that the regime change its stance and finally recognises the right of our ally Israel to exist?
I can. Of course it should recognise the right of Israel to exist, and it should work with the United States and the E3 particularly to ensure that it is putting whatever has been developed beyond use.
Luke Akers.
Mr. Speaker, over the past decades, Iran and its terrorist proxies have effectively colonised 5 Middle Eastern countries and used them as launching pads for attacks against Israel. Iran's been goading and indeed preparing for a conflict with Israel for decades, including the genocidal intent behind its nuclear weapons development. How will the UK support our many allies in the region, Arab countries as well as Israel, facing similar threats from the Iranian regime?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and can I remind him that we have the strongest of bilateral defence relationships with Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Oman, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq and Lebanon at this time, and they can rely on us.
Ayab Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But forgive me, Mr. Speaker, I've got to press the Foreign Secretary on this point. A lot of honourable members have asked him specifically whether he supports the attack conducted by the United States. He's refused to answer that question. Is it because, like many of the British public, realise that it was an illegal attack on Iran?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I said on the radio this morning, and let me say again, I will continue to work with our closest ally to ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State's calls for a durable diplomatic solution. No one benefits from this conflict continuing. Will the Foreign Secretary outline what steps the government is taking to ensure peace and prevent war in the region, particularly guaranteeing that the Straits of Hormuz remain safe for LNG and oil tankers? Securing this vital trade route is essential for global stability and global economic security, including Iran's.
Foreign Secretary.
I'm very grateful to the question from my honourable friend, and that's because many members of the public beyond this chamber will be worrying about the risk on inflation of an oil shock particularly, and will want to be reassured that the government is doing everything it can to be clear to Iran that it cannot blockade the Strait of Hormuz, it cannot mine the Strait of Hormuz, it must not do that, and we of course will act with allies to prevent such an occurrence if it were to occur.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It seems for an hour and a quarter we've been going round in circles, in that in answering questions, the Foreign Secretary has rightly pointed out that diplomacy has failed to stop Iran reaching 60% enriched uranium. Likewise, he has rightly acknowledged that diplomacy has failed to stop Iran spreading terrorism and sponsoring terrorism around the region, yet each time he's concluded in a hope of greater rounds of diplomacy to solve this, and hope is not a strategy. So at what point will the Foreign Secretary acknowledge that there probably can be no diplomacy within a regime that is so brutal to its own people and that just won't listen?
The honourable gentleman is a bright man. He knows that once a country has acquired the means to enrich to 60%, the expertise exists, and only a diplomatic solution can create the framework to eradicate and control that expertise. And that is why, in the end, this can only be dealt with diplomatically, and it's why President Trump is urging Iran to return to the negotiating table.
David Taylor.
Mr. Speaker, as well as the Iranian regime's threat to Israel, the Iranian regime has also supported Assad to kill 500,000 people in Syria, including Palestinians, and supplies Putin with the drones he is currently using to massacre people in Ukraine. We must also remember, of course, that it persecutes its own people, including human rights activists. And just as ministers have, I'm pleased to say, engaged with Syrian activists in the UK to hear their views on the future of their country, can I ask ministers and the Foreign Secretary assure me that they will engage with human rights activists and democracy activists here in Britain to help guide their approach going forward?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend's question. His articulacy is spot on, and I can give him that undertaking between myself and the Minister for the Middle East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We talk weekly in this place about Russia's illegal bombing of Ukraine. Now, Russia may not be a close ally like the US, but presumably, if international law applies to that, then the US bombing of Iran would likewise be illegal under international law. If not, then could the Foreign Secretary explain why international law would apply differently to the US and where that leaves us if this conflict escalates in the region?
I say gently to the honourable lady, one should always be wary of moral equivalence. Russia invaded a sovereign country, and for the last years has been firing rockets into that country, aided by Iran. And we will continue to stand up to Putin's abysmal aggression, and of course he should be held to account.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for his continued clarity that the UK has not been involved in this military action in the Middle East, and thank him and his team for all their diplomatic efforts on de-escalation. I agree with what he said about the horrific situation in Gaza, where in the last week more than 100 Palestinians have been killed while starving and waiting for aid. He said he's pressed the US and Israel on this in the last week. Can I ask if he's continuing to discuss this and press for action together with France and Canada? And given his remarks about UK citizens in Qatar, what can he say about conversations with the Gulf and Jordan on protecting our citizens, assets and others there, should it be needed?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. Yes, I've liaised with Jordan, I've liaised with Gulf partners. I will be speaking to the UAE very shortly, later on today. We will work with them to keep them safe, and she's absolutely right to put on record our deep concerns about those who've lost their lives in Gaza just over the last few days.
And Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Foreign Secretary and his department for the work they're doing to protect British citizens here and abroad. What does he think needs to happen for Iran to abandon its ambitions to build and deploy a nuclear weapon?
Iran has got to recognise that it's lost its air defences. That it's my belief that its friends in Russia and China will be not rushing to its aid, that its proxies are degraded, and the international community is firm. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. They have now got to come back to the negotiation table. We've got to put in a framework that deals with the stockpiles, that deals with the centrifuges, and deals with enrichment of 60%, and deals with the problem of ballistic missiles.
Jacob Colley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement and for his level-headed approach in calling for de-escalation. He's spoken about the further threat of escalation with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which, of course, he knows a large proportion of the world's oil supply flows. Can he say more about how he will protect UK households and businesses from these potential rising oil prices?
It's important that we de-escalate at this time. It's important that diplomacy prevail. And of course, it's important that we work with our allies for every contingency. So I'm not in the business of talking up fears about a shock in oil prices, but working to reassure the British people that we are doing all we can to see that that eventuality does not come to pass.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Iran must never have a nuclear weapon, is something this House has agreed on. But the former Russian Premier, Dmitry Medvedev, has said there will be now a number of countries considering supplying nuclear warheads to Iran. Can I ask the Foreign Secretary of his assessment of that statement, and what is the government doing to prevent it?
It would be wrong for me to go into detail about that, but to say that, of course, it's come to my attention, and also to put on record my grave concerns by the reports that Iran's parliament are preparing to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. That would isolate Iran further.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further escalation in the Middle East could have devastating consequences not only for the region but for global stability. And given the provocative and inflammatory rhetoric from President Trump and the risk of unpredictable US actions further destabilising the situation, can the Foreign Secretary set out what steps the government is taking to work with international partners to de-escalate tensions and protect the UK interests? And can he give a definitive answer to the question about UK involvement?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that we were not involved. And over the weekend, I spoke to my Cypriot counterpart, I spoke to my Lebanese counterpart. In the days before that, I spoke to all counterparts in the Gulf. Of course, we are working to de-escalate at this time.
Subject.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the event that Iran does launch a retaliatory military strike against the US, what does the government believe our Article 5 obligations would be with regards to military support for the US? And how will that change if the location of the attack is in the region?
Yeah.
Well, can I refer him to 213 of the Ministerial Code?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. With his 25 years of parliamentary service, the Foreign Secretary will no doubt remember when Tony Blair told us that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and were a grave threat to international security. And then, of course, we followed America into an illegal war in the Middle East. And if the Prime Minister were to go down that same road, then he will be wrong also. Is it not overdue that the government followed an independent and, as Robin Cook memorably said, an ethical foreign policy, one created here and not in Washington, DC?
Well, the honourable gentleman allows me to put on record what a privilege it's been to serve and work as Foreign Secretary alongside a Prime Minister of such tremendous principle and legal learning that entirely understands his obligations, entirely understands what good government looks like, and is absolutely steadfast in his belief in the international rules-based order.
Cameron Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Foreign Secretary for the gravity which he's applying to this important topic. 1 week ago, the Foreign Secretary told me that he had huge confidence in our ability to defend our Middle Eastern assets from Iranian strikes. But within 2 days, 2 strategic assets were vandalised by a couple of civilians on an e-scooter at RAF Bryce Norton. Yeah. Does the Foreign Secretary recognise that the UK must not follow Trump into Netanyahu's war with Iran when force protection is inadequately resourced at home?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for his service in the RAF, and can I refer him to a statement that the Armed Services Minister will shortly be making in the House about the security of our sovereign bases.
I think so.
Mr. Speaker, just a week ago we were here calling for de-escalation due to so many civilian deaths, but in the last week we have seen an escalation with so many more civilian deaths in Israel, in Gaza, in Iran. We know it's much easier to get into a conflict than to conclude it. If the justification for military action is now a nuclear weapons programme and being a threat to your neighbours, how many other nations fit that category? Isn't North Korea another country with an even more advanced nuclear weapons programme? Where is Article 51, the UN Convention, now in terms of justification?
Well, my honourable friend's question goes to the heart of why it would be a travesty for Iran to withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and why we must work to ensure that Iran does not become a North Korea. It must never have a nuclear weapons programme, and we will do everything to stop that happening.
David Simmons.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. The family of my constituent, Katie Solomon, have been in touch to share their fears about her as she shelters from Iranian attacks in Israel. And my constituent, Mehdi Mosleh, has told me about how his life in the UK started as a refugee from the Iranian regime. So can the Foreign Secretary tell my constituents in the House why, given Iran's record, he is finding it so difficult to follow the Prime Minister in welcoming the actions of our allies in seeking to reduce the risks posed by the Iranian nuclear programme?
Well, can I say to the Honourable Gentleman that he will recall that in representing my constituency in Tottenham, I have the Stamford Hill area of London, which is the home of many in our Orthodox Jewish community, many of whom are in Israel as we speak, sheltering too in their bunkers. So the picture he paints is one that I recognise, and it's why I'll do everything I can to work with them and protect them.
Pinto Presidency.
Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my right honourable friend for his statement. Dozens of people from my Hendon constituency have been stranded in Israel and Iran. I thank the Foreign Secretary for his hard work on this issue, and it's good news that the first flight has already occurred. Can he say more about the timeframes for potential future flights, and also say more on what is being done to support those looking to leave Israel by land, borders or by sea?
I updated the House about our rapid response teams that are working in Israel and at borders for those who are able to journey to the land borders in Jordan and Egypt to leave. We have a flight in the air as we speak, and I expect that there will be further flights in the coming days, but it does depend on airspace and how those days look.
Lincoln Chop.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Foreign Secretary for a statement in which he says that he's been crystal clear with the regime in Tehran. I hope he's been a lot clearer with them than he has been with the House today, because I'm going to give it one more go, because I genuinely don't understand why he can't answer this question. Does His Majesty's government support or oppose US military action against Iran at the weekend?
His Majesty's government will continue to work with our closest ally, as I was last week in Washington, D.C.
Mr. Scott Harper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do thank the Foreign Secretary for his energy he's invested in de-escalation because it's the only moral route out of this conflict. And I thank him also for reassuring us that UK forces aren't involved and not giving up for the plight facing ordinary Gazans. There's 90 million people in Iran. Just under 10 million of them are in Tehran. There's reports of many of them trying to leave the country. And this will be made worse by the reports around the speculation around regime change. There's also reports that Turkey and Pakistan might be closing their borders to refugees. Is this something he's keeping a watchful eye on, and has he discussed it with our international partners?
Well, I'm very grateful to you, Honourable Friend, for the question, and it was why I spoke to our ambassadors and teams across the region this morning, because I recognise that this is a worrying and stressful time in all of those areas, which is why my central message and task is to de-escalate. We need more light and less heat.
If I heard the Foreign Secretary correctly, he said that the UK would act if Iran sought to block the Strait of Hormuz. Did he mean act militarily? And then under what other conditions would he consider military action? And what would he say if the Americans turned to this government and asked them for support in any military adventure to do with this conflict?
It would be quite wrong for me from this dispatch box to get into eventualities and operational matters at this time. But be reassured that all contingencies are in place to keep our people and to work with our allies to keep the region safe.
Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The most in-depth study ever conducted on the casualties of the war on so-called terror was conducted by Brown University in America. They found that directly or indirectly, over 4.5 million people lost their lives. 4.5 million people partially lost their lives because of what was voted for in this House. So can the Minister agree with me that the only resolution to this conflict is through diplomacy? And can he assure the House he will not follow the previous Labour government and the previous Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair's mantra when it comes to America bombing Middle Eastern country is with you whatever, and lead this country and the world into the abyss?
Well, I can restate, as I have throughout this afternoon, that diplomacy is in the way, and I can remind him that our government and successive governments have learned from the Chilcot inquiry.
Speaker, why should the House of Commons and the country that we represent not be entitled to know whether their government supports or regrets the American action? And doesn't equivocation in that issue bring succour to those we say must be robbed quite properly of their nuclear potential?
I think the people of Britain are entitled to know that we were not involved in this action, that we work for diplomacy and de-escalation. That is why I was sitting in the White House last week. It's why I was in Geneva on Friday, and it was why I was at a COBRA meeting and making a round of calls to allies and partners to de-escalate at this time yesterday.
Sarah Poach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Foreign Secretary, is he able to explain to the House whether the United States felt unable to use the Diego Garcia base and have to refuel in a highly dangerous operation 3 times because of that, because of your deal that you did with the Mauritians that would then tell the Chinese, that would then tell the Iranians?
Good.
The Honourable Lady has got to get off social media and has got to get some help. Has got to get some help because she's swallowing conspiracy theories that should not be repeated in this House.
Ellie John.
Answer the question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Iranian regime has long been a threat to peace, democracy and human rights. But the unilateral, illegal and dangerously provocative Israeli and now American attacks have made a tense situation extremely perilous and are completely outside international law. It's therefore deeply concerning to hear the Secretary of State echoing the talking points of Netanyahu and Trump, instead of standing up for those principles, clearly condemning the illegality of these bombings and unequivocally ruling out the UK being dragged into any military action supporting such illegal action. Why will he not?
I'm focused on Iran's desire for a nuclear weapon. I'm focused on the UK's solemn obligation to stop that happening. And I am focused on the diplomacy that is required to bring that about.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement today. I've often spoken in this chamber about the Iranian regime and the horrific human rights abuses that take place under IRGC control. I have nothing but admiration for the steps taken to destroy Iranian nuclear armament by our US and Israel allies. These are steps that we must support. So will the Foreign Secretary confirm that the UK stands shoulder to shoulder with the US and Israel as they do what needs to be done, and further that we send a message to Iran that retaliation in any form will not be acceptable and they will face the might of the best armed forces in the world, that is the British Armed Forces.
I can reassure the honourable gentleman that of course we stand with our allies in the United States and indeed in Israel in facing down the repeated threats from Iran, an existential threat of course to Israel, but a destabilising in the neighbourhood. Of course we will stand up to them.
Right, let the front benches change it. We now come to the statement for the business trade. Secretary of State.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I wish to make a statement on how this Labour government is backing British business and British workers with the launch of the UK's modern industrial strategy. At the outset, I would like to thank Dame Claire Barclay and all the members of the Industrial Strategy Advisory Council for all their outstanding work and that of my officials in preparing the launch of this strategy today. Mr. Speaker, in an uncertain world, stability, clarity and consistency are needed now more than ever. The challenges we face require nothing less than a government on the pitch, clearing the way for private enterprise and doing so in the best interests of working people. That is what this pro-business, pro-worker government is going to deliver. Today, I launch a strategy to make Britain the best place in the world to start and grow a business, based on a fundamentally new economic approach from what we have had in the past, a break from the declinism, the dither, the disinterest that defined the last Conservative government. This strategy speaks to the strength and breadth of our economy, be it building strong industrial foundations, powering frontier technologies, or supporting our world-leading services sector to innovate and to thrive. It brings together every bit of government to drive investment, improving the total business environment by drawing on every government department's expertise. It is a plan to rebuild Britain through new jobs, new industries and new investments. A plan to launch thousands of new careers in engineering, life sciences and professional services and more. A plan where Britain's future is designed and built in Britain. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I accept. Until this government came to power, British business was treated to a merry-go-round of policy changes, only matched by the shuffling of successive business secretaries. We are now providing the stability that is at such a premium across the world. Make UK have long called for, and I quote, a funded and joined-up long-term vision as a matter of urgency for stability and investment, and I couldn't have put it better myself. So from the moment we took office, we said we would pursue this new economic approach, where industrial policy would be something done with business and not to business. And we are fulfilling that commitment today. And I would like to place on record My thanks also to the thousands of businesses who've engaged in this process, that have designed this strategy with us. And this is not a document that will be printed and then forgotten. We will put the Industrial Strategy Council and the Industrial Strategy on a statutory footing to hardwire these changes for the long term. Madam Deputy Speaker, this government has brought stability and openness and a pro-growth agenda. But as I've told this House previously, working people must feel the benefits of economic growth. We must go further and faster if we want to achieve the kind of economic growth the public should expect and see in their public services and feel in their pay packets. Business has provided a wealth of testimony and evidence to the areas they see as holding them back, and there are no surprises to that list. It starts with energy, because we have amongst the highest industrial electricity prices in the developed world at present. They went up 50% in real terms under the previous government. Skills, because when you have vacancies at the same time as 1 in 8 young people are NEET, and net immigration at 1 million as it was when we took office, something has gone badly wrong. And place, because too much of the country has been held back by crumbling infrastructure and a lack of investment and by the north-south divide. And that ends now. We will make the bold choices to ensure every region and every nation can play to their strengths. And finally, access to finance, because without access to capital, we will always have a ceiling on ambition. Today, we have smashed through these barriers. Let me take each of these 4 specifically in turn, starting with energy. Today, we have announced that we will slash electricity costs by between 20 and 25% through a new British industrial competitiveness scheme. This will bring our prices more closely in line with Europe, and it will be a game changer. We will also put in place the reforms we need for businesses to get the much faster connections to the grid that they need. Now, this means companies in sectors like car making and chemicals who will see their electricity costs cut. The scheme could benefit over 7,000 businesses with high electricity usage in industrial strategy, foundational industries and high-growth manufacturing sectors, which collectively employ over 300,000 skilled workers. As well as this, we will launch an expanded version of the Supercharger scheme so that some of our largest companies in electricity-intensive sectors, including investments in the future, such as the new Steelworks electric arc furnace at Port Talbot and the Agratas Gigafactory in Somerset, who will see their network charging exemptions rise from 60% to 90%, cutting their electricity bills and again making them more competitive than our European neighbours. I understand this was something the previous government actually promised to business, but again failed to deliver. And I confirm this will all be done without adding a penny onto consumer bills or onto the bills of any other business. Secondly, we are shaking up the skills system to prioritise digital, engineering and defence skills, so British workers can secure good, secure jobs in tomorrow's economy. Our industrial strategy sectors are already on track to create 1.1 million new good, well-paying jobs with the help of this industrial strategy. And we want those opportunities to benefit all of our constituents. That's why we're investing over £275 million in our engineering skills package and the Skills Mission Fund to deliver training and new technical excellence colleges as part of our wider skills offer. And through our global talent visa reforms and the Global Talent Task Force, we are also ensuring that UK businesses can recruit the best of the best from here and abroad. And on the issue of place, on the economic geography of the UK, which means a great deal to me and many of my colleagues who listened to grand plans to level up that turned into a few new extra flower pots and empty promises. I want to be clear, this strategy is unashamedly ambitious. It chooses to back where there are clusters of high-growth sectors, and it will work with the developed governments, the mayors and local leaders to boost that growth. We're making it easier to get money to places, to turn investment into spades in the ground and cranes in the sky, through industrial strategy zones that will bring together our existing network of free ports and investment zones. And we will also, for the first time, include a new programme, identifying investable sites where we will fast-track development, similar to the approach taken in France. But our infrastructure must match our ambition, so we'll strengthen connections between city regions and clusters through the Oxford to Cambridge Growth Corridor, the Growth Corridor across our northern city regions, the Edinburgh-Glasgow Central Belt, and through rail enhancements in Wales. Finally, we will unlock billions of pounds in business finance with the National Wealth Fund supporting our growth sectors, with an expanded role for UK export finance, and £4 billion for growth capital for start-ups and scale-ups through a larger British business bank, addressing that key stage at scale-up that we know is the most challenging. This growth capital will catalyse £12 billion of private capital across the 8 growth-driving sectors and deliver around £30 billion of additional GVA to the UK economy. Now, these measures, alongside our transformative sector plans, are how we can realise the untapped potential in key parts of our economy. For instance, by 2035, we aim to double business investment in advanced manufacturing, increasing the volume of vehicles produced in the UK to 1.3 million, while creating the first European market for self-driving vehicles. We are turbocharging our clean energy mission with investment in offshore wind, in small modular reactors, in carbon capture, in green hydrogen, in gigafactories, ports and green steel. We will make our United Kingdom one of the top 3 places in the world for creating and scaling digital technology business. That means training 1 million young people in tech skills and expanding our AI research resource by at least 20-fold by 2030. We will significantly increase business investment in our world-leading creative industries sector to £31 billion, cementing our position as one of the great creative exporters in the world. For our life sciences sector, our ambition is that the UK will be, by 2030, the leading life sciences economy in Europe, and by 2035, the 3rd most important life sciences economy globally, after the US and China. At the same time, we plan to double business investment in professional and business services to £61 billion, ensuring the continued growth in a powerhouse industry that accounts for millions of jobs in the UK, the vast majority of them outside of London. And we have already announced the largest increase in defence spending since the Cold War, and will use this to transform the UK into a defence industrial superpower by 2035, leading Europe in defence exports and closing the gap in venture capital investment in defence with the US by half. And for our financial services, the heart of business investment and stability, we will harness opportunities as markets digitise and adopt new technologies, and ensure the whole economy feels the benefits of increased investment. And this industrial strategy also ensures that places and sectors can take full advantage of the UK's position as a global hub for trade. The UK has long been and will remain a champion of free trade, which is why, under this government, we've delivered trade agreements with our biggest trading partner in the world, with the biggest economy in the world, and with the fastest growing economy in the world, making the UK the best connected market in the world. And through this industrial strategy, we are reaffirming our commitment to free, fair, resilient trade, while shielding businesses from supply chain disruption and market-distorting practices. We'll leverage our relationships with Europe, the US, with China, with the Gulf and beyond, so businesses can make the UK their base to connect with global markets. It will work, hand in glove with the trade strategy my department will publish later this week, to help British companies break into new markets, to export more and to grow more. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a watershed moment. For too long, governments have been a source of problems for British business and not a path to solutions. That has resulted in parts of the country like where I and many of us here grew up, where we watched yards and factories close along with the door to opportunity. A sense we were losing the past, but we had no bridge to the future. That also ends now, because our plan for change is backing this country's greatest assets and frontier industries to put more money into people's pockets, to raise living standards and to unleash a decade of national renewal. I welcome Make UK's comments that today is one of the most important days for British industry in a generation. Yeah. We are creating prosperous, proud and outward-facing but self-reliant, independent and highly skilled nation. A country where opportunity, skills and wealth are spread fairly, where every person and every business will have the chance to flourish. That is what our modern industrial strategy will deliver, Madam Deputy Speaker. Our future in our hands, built in Britain. That is what this strategy will achieve. And I commend this statement to the House.
I know, please be seated, I know that the Secretary of State is very diligent, but if he lets his officials know that if the opening statement is to go beyond 10 minutes, they should let the Speaker's office know, and because the statement went a little bit longer, I'll allow the Opposition and the Liberal Democrats to have an extra 1 minute each. And I'll come to the Shadow Secretary of State, Andrew Griffiths.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. It is always a good day, Madam Deputy Speaker, when we can talk about our wonderful and innovative British businesses. But sad to say, this strategy has taken the best part of 12 months to appear. That is how long British industry has had to wait for this cut and paste industrial strategy. 158 pages, mostly copied and pasted from previous sector strategies and the science and technology framework, which do nothing to alleviate the pain and turmoil that Labour have already inflicted. In that 12 months, we've seen Labour have crashed the economy, unemployment up in every one of the 9 months of this government, hiring down and investment down. I understand that the document is printed on 40% recycled paper, very much like its contents, and yet there's no respite for business from the decisions that have been taken. The Secretary of State talks about restoring stability. That may well be what was written for him, but he, like me, listens to businesses and he can't possibly believe that. The government hiked taxes by £40 billion when they promised not to, and gilt rates are higher today than they were after the mini-budget. They fiddled the fiscal rules and are now running out of headroom, all while setting up state investment banks in a repeat of the last Labour government's PFI. Higher taxes, higher energy costs and more red tape on employment. The proposals set out in this document are simply insufficient at a time when businesses need far greater measures to defend them from the minefield Labour have left out. There are, Madam Deputy Speaker, many elements of this strategy we do welcome. I'm pleased the government has continued the work the former Chancellor and I undertook on access to capital. It's good to see an emphasis on trade and international cooperation, particularly with reference to the document's focus on Japan and Saudi Arabia. And I'm glad the government has implementing the O'Shaughnessy reforms and turning the NHS into a global platform health data research service. And it's encouraging to see the weight given to autonomous cars, though curious, there's no mention of the opportunity of driverless trains. I'm disappointed that the life sciences and engineering biology receive relatively modest mentions. There's a minor mention of skills reform, but no real deregulation to make our labour market, and an almost near absence of references to small businesses, which account for the majority of businesses and the majority of employment in this country. But the big miss today, Madam Deputy Speaker, is energy. We welcome the Prime Minister's epiphany this weekend as he announced that he would slash green levies on a certain number of businesses. However, the industrial strategy still talks about accelerating to net zero at a time when British business needs the opposite. This is simply mad. And rather than addressing the root causes of high energy costs, sitting next to the Business Secretary, this government seems intent on adding to the web of complexity of taxes, levies and subsidies. And there is nothing in this, Madam Deputy Speaker, about reopening the North Sea, the energy reserves that lie under our own secure feet. It even confounds the by imposing further self-harm through a carbon border adjustment mechanism, a tariff by another name that will cost businesses in this country and consumers dear. And how can anyone outside of this postcode running a business believe that Labour intend to cut the regulatory burden when they have set up a new quango at a rate of 1 every 2 weeks, including in the Business Secretary's own department? And how can anyone outside of Whitehall, looking at the regulations, take seriously the commitments in this document when his own department are guiding through this House 300 pages of trade union written employment law, which will force employers to cut hiring and jobs? Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll conclude with a number of questions. And if the Secretary of State can't answer today, perhaps he'd be so kind to write with a reply. The small business strategy was promised for the spring. The summer solstice is now behind us. Can he tell the millions of businesses when that is coming? There are a number of live situations which he will be aware of. The bioethanol plant in Saltend Chemicals plant in Hull, Syngenta moving its precision wheat breeding programme to France, and the government equivocating over supporting the stake in the vital low Earth orbit satellite business operator OneWeb. So does he agree with me that it's actions, not words, that count, and will he impress that upon his Treasury colleagues? And finally, today's strategy does talk about reducing the number of regulators. That is wholly welcome, as we need a marked cull in the number of regulators and their scope and size. So will the Secretary commit to publishing an annual statement showing the progress his government are making, and would he start today by agreeing not to create any new ones?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, so fuelled with optimism am I. Even the Conservative front bench can't bring that optimism down today. I do think it's having been in opposition myself for some time, to come out and say this document is all rubbish and I welcome most of it is quite an exciting take on responding at these moments. But I know the Conservative Party, I think, has managed to oppose almost everything this government has done in the first year, including in my department, the product standards bill, which the previous government was actually planning to bring had it remained in office, and the India trade deal they were negotiating but couldn't get across the line. So I welcome the small bits of positive news in his messaging. I would say everyone should support this. Everyone across the House should support this, because it has been based on the things that won't be secrets to honourable members who spend time on their constituency Fridays and weekends with businesses. They will be told about skills and energy and access to finance and the need for local areas to have the powers they need to address the needs in their local economies. I hope he would also recognise, in good spirits, that many of the things that need to be addressed are problems that grew during the Conservative government. Those energy bills becoming so uncompetitive, that was a result of actions and decisions made by the Conservative government. We're fixing that problem. We're fixing that problem to make the difference. Skills, 1 in 8 young people NEET, where net immigration is at 1 million. That is not a policy success, colleagues. That needed to be addressed, and we needed to address the failures around the funding of courses like engineering that was such an obvious need for our sector. Finance, one of the longest running problems that we're all familiar with. He asks a number of questions. I'm more than happy to answer them. First of all, on small businesses. Well, if he reads perhaps more of the detail when he has a bit more time, he will see in the creative industries sector, in the defence sector, SMEs play a vital role in these sector plans. The second thing I would say to anyone looking at, well, what's the story, what's the message to businesses who are not in sectors covered by the industrial strategy? Well, they will benefit from people having good jobs, high incomes, whether that's hospitality, retail or leisure. Of course, they have a direct benefit from this strategy. And finally, of course, the small business plan, which he asked about, will come out next month in July. That deals with issues like late payment, business support, access to the kind of tools we need on the high street, rental auctions and so forth, that will make a difference. He attacked net zero. That's a mistake. That would be turning our backs on billions and billions of pounds of investment. Why would we do that? Why would we do that with all the benefits that could bring, particularly a country that isn't so reliant on volatile foreign gas prices? I think that is an obvious thing that we would not want to turn our backs on. He seems to announce a new Conservative position opposing CBAMs. That's obviously about carbon leakage and a level playing field. I'm surprised by that, because the previous Conservative government was a very strong advocate of that. On the bioethanol industry, talks remain with the 2 plants most directly affected. They, of course, were in a challenging position before the US trade deal. It's not in itself the cause of that. They were losing money, and of course, if I intervene, I have to have a route to profitability, but that's the basis of those conversations. Precision breeding is something we're committed to. For businesses moving to France, they'd find a more restrictive environment in France because of EU regulation, so I wouldn't recommend that. OneWeb is some specific issues I'd be more than happy to talk to him about. And finally, on regulation. We've already taken decisive action with, for instance, the CMA, with a strategic steer that's been warmly welcomed by business. People ask me for more of that, and that's exactly what we intend to bring. And finally, let me say, because I know this is so important to front bench colleagues across the House, I'm more than happy to offer a briefing to any front bench spokesman or any group of colleagues across the House, because there is so much in this document that will make a difference, so much detail worth sharing. If colleagues need that, I'd be more than happy to share that with them. But I will say, let's all get behind this and get behind British industry.
Select Committee Chair Liam.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, can I congratulate my right honourable friend on what is the biggest remaking of the relationship between the public and private sector for a generation. The business community in this country is going to be stronger and better for the measures that he has announced today. Business in particular will welcome the huge investment in skills, in access to research and development, and in access to capital. But the absolute game changer is the investment that he has announced in energy. Cutting industrial energy prices is a way to get rid of that albatross around the neck of British business. It is a big promise. Can he assure the House today that there is both the plan and the pound notes to deliver on that pledge?
I warmly welcome those words from the chair of the Select Committee. I absolutely agree with him. There's so much in here. But I think the situation with energy, being so uncompetitive, it became, I think, a test from business of credibility. Could action be taken? And the kind of changes we are talking about, a reduction in £35 to £40 per megawatt hour by exempting eligible businesses from the payments for the renewables obligation, from feed-in tariffs and from the capacity market, will make a real difference. We're talking about going from being the absolute outlier to, for instance, today we would be cheaper than Italy, the Czech Republic, on a par with Germany. That is a game changer, and that has been welcomed. We obviously have to consult. We can do the changes to the supercharger quicker than we can introduce this. But of course, we have to set a threshold intensity test that makes sure it goes to the sectors that will be in most need of that. But I can tell them we expect that to include those core foundational sectors, as well, of course, aerospace, automotive, and all the areas where the competitive pressure is most acute. And I'm incredibly excited by it.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Liberal Democrats have long been champions of the industrial strategy. We're proud that the strategy we introduced in government set up the Green Investment Bank, the British Business Bank and the Regional Growth Fund. And we strongly opposed the previous Conservative government's damaging decision to scrap our country's industrial plan. So we therefore welcome the re-establishment of the industrial strategy and the fact that it focuses on many of the sectors that we prioritised in government, including life sciences, professional services and clean energy. On energy, measures to bring down some of the highest industrial prices in the world will be welcome news for our manufacturers and energy-intensive firms. But we can't forget that businesses across our entire economy struggle with high energy prices, not least our hospitality businesses and our SMEs. So what steps is the Secretary of State taking to ensure that small businesses across sectors have access to better energy deals? And will he look to bring forward the Industrial Competitiveness Scheme from its current 2-year horizon? On skills, while today's announcement comes with a welcome funding boost, it stops well short of the fundamental reform that we need to see. So I ask the Secretary of State if he will accelerate the reform of apprenticeships and empower Skills England to act as a properly independent body with employers at its heart. One key omission is our world-leading agri-food industry, which has been relegated from a priority sector under our plans to receiving a handful of mentions in the entire White Paper, and I hope that the Secretary of State will admit that our farmers and rural communities deserve far better. Madam Deputy Speaker, if the Government is truly serious about backing British business and going for growth, will they show more ambition on trade with Europe and look to negotiate a new UK-EU customs union which can put rocket boosters under UK PLC? And in the extra time that you've kindly granted me, Madam Deputy Speaker, can I ask the Secretary of State about access to finance, particularly about addressing inequalities? I have been the chairman for the APPG on black and minority ethnic business owners, and I've seen for myself the data that shows how much more difficult it is for those businesses to access finance, and I know that similar data exists for women entrepreneurs, and to address those inequalities would add a great deal to growth. And can I finally ask, when will we see more details about the National Wealth Fund? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Well, I warmly welcome the Honourable Lady's support. I thought that section of the Liberal Democrat manifesto was very well written, whoever is responsible for that. Much that we could all get behind, very much made the case. She is right to say that Liberal Democrats in government supported this approach. I've talked, by the way, to nearly every one of my living predecessors, not all of them, but some of the ones that have done this kind of work and made a difference across the political divide and made a difference on that. There are some new things in the sectors that we've picked. I mean, creative industries, an absolutely brilliant economic as well as soft power and cultural strength of this country. Great to see them included around that. I know in terms of the timescale for energy policy changes, I know people who recognise the burden this represents want to see action quickly. I want to see it as quickly as possible. I can make the changes to the supercharger scheme and the generosity of that more quickly because it's an existing scheme that the intensity thresholds are already in place. For the industrial competitiveness scheme, I think we'll need legislation in order to implement it, and that will take more time, depending on how cooperative colleagues are across the House. I welcome what you said on skills. I think skills is always going to be the number one thing any business raises with their Member of Parliament. The fundamental reform she's talking about, I recognise the case she's making since the apprenticeship levy was introduced. Employer investment on skills has actually gone down. That's not what any of us want to see. So we will ask Skills England and the Industrial Strategy Council to work more closely on this issue of what do businesses need to put more investment in themselves, ask them to report by the budget this year to see if we can take forward a more comprehensive set of changes. Of course, the Department for Education owns that part of the policy, but this is a cross-government industrial strategy, as it should be. She mentions agri-food. It is a subsector of advanced manufacturing, so don't worry, it is included. The only item of disagreement is, she asks, of course, on trade, and I would say this government is managing the precious international trade better than any other country in the world. She will know the customs union that she is proposing would mean, for instance, we couldn't have the trade deal with India, which has brought tariffs down on salmon and Scotch whisky and automotive vehicles. It would mean that we couldn't have the agreement with the US, which has saved tens of thousands of jobs. So I can't agree with her on that point. I think we should have closer trade with Europe, closer trade with the US, closer trade with the rest of the world. And finally, on access to finance, I thoroughly agree and appreciate that point. This is a core business and economic issue for the UK. It's not some minor issue. The level of finance going to, for instance, female-led entrepreneurs is not sufficient. We already have backed some of those very significant campaigns through the British Business Bank, explicitly backing them, and I stand ready to do more. I recognise absolutely the case she's making. I think it's an important one.
David Williams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome this incredibly positive industrial strategy, which will help us to harness Britain's potential. In the strategy, it rightly recognises that Stoke-on-Trent has been at the heart of ceramics industry for centuries. Therefore, can I ask the Secretary of State to outline what the industrial strategy means for both our traditional ceramics companies, which produce the finest tableware, and also for advanced ceramics with a view to the future?
Well, I very much welcome his comments, welcoming the strategy. There's a great deal I could go through. I'd get in trouble with you, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I mentioned the benefits for every sector contained within it. But I think we would all recognise the pressure on that sector through energy prices. Of course, much of the industry is gas intensive. There aren't policy tools in the same way we can do with that. But in terms of the fact that I know only a small number of ceramics businesses currently benefit from the supercharger, I think it's only 8 in total. That is why the test for the British Industrial Competitiveness Programme is a different one and designed in such a way, and of course there'll be a proper process to assess thresholds and eligibility, but it is designed in such a way that in terms of the foundation sectors, which ceramics is very much included in the material side of that, they would get the benefit of this programme.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Belated though it is, the announcement about energy costs is obviously vitally important to the steel sector. The Secretary of State is well aware of the situation in Scunthorpe, so can he give an assurance that for the foreseeable future the production of virgin steel will continue in Scunthorpe, but also that he will work with North Lincolnshire Council, who have got plans for redevelopment of the redundant parts of the site, particularly in respect of an AI growth zone?
I thank him very much for his work. I think the whole House knows of my personal interest in steel and the measures that we have taken, including the recall of Parliament and the passing of the Special Measures Act that was required to save the jobs for his constituents. He is right to say that for the kind of investment required in some of the most electricity-intensive opportunities of the future, and electric arc furnaces, if we were to go down that route at Scunthorpe, require the kind of programme which the enhanced supercharger level will get to because of the measures outlined here today. There is not yet a plan for transition at Scunthorpe, as he knows. We have taken control. We need to resolve the issue of ownership. We continue to run it in such a way that minimises the losses to the taxpayer. That's meant putting more money in up front to run the plant at full capacity, which I think he will very much support. And I can tell him we'll continue to work with anyone in the local area, including himself and my honourable friend for Scunthorpe, in order to make sure there is a bright future, which I absolutely believe is possible for the steel sector based on the policy environment we're putting in place.
Dame Cheaton Warren.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I really welcome this modern industrial strategy as chair of the Select Committee because it delivers on the promise made in opposition to put science, innovation and technology and the skills that they require at the heart of the drive for growth and industrialisation. And I welcome it as a North East MP because of the emphasis on regional growth and regional strengths. And my committee found that one of the major barriers to regional growth and innovation was access to capital. This industrial strategy commits to doubling business investment by 2035. Can you say a little bit about how the North East, just for example, might benefit from that?
First of all, let me congratulate my honourable friend on her recent honour. I know she's not one for a fuss of it, but it's inspiring and it's great to see that recognition. She is right to say access to finance is a pillar of this industrial strategy. So, for instance, the increase in capacity for the British Business Bank in the spending review was not only up to £4 billion, but the increase in the maximum ticket it could write to 60 million is part of that. We've had a huge increase in the capacity of UK export finance in that spending review. North East is a huge exporting region, as she knows, with a very positive balance of payments of any English region, and the direct lending capacity of that has increased as well. So we now have a story on finance, from UKRI and Innovate UK for innovative scale-up, innovative startups, to the British Business Bank for scale-up and maturity, going to the National Wealth Fund, and UK Export Finance supporting every part of that journey. It's a comprehensive offer that's detailed in this document that will benefit, well, all parts of the UK, but of course the North East of England.
Rebecca Smith. Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the announcement of Plymouth's Defence Cluster, the National Centre for Marine Autonomy, and I'm proud that much of this work is being done in my constituency at Turnchapel Wharf and soon at Langage in the Plymouth and South Devon Freeport, and includes the Smart Sound, all supported by the last Conservative government, and indeed didn't really need a special name, it was already happening. The Chancellor's spending review speech initially included mention of £4 billion for autonomous systems split between 3 locations, including Plymouth, yet when checked against delivery, this element was missing. Please could the Minister clarify what funding is available for these autonomous system development in the strategy, in addition to the money announced for the submarine and Castile programme at His Majesty's Naval Base Devonport?
Well, I think that was a positive response to the industrial strategy. There certainly sounded like some positive themes there. She's asked a reasonable, specific question about her constituency. I will check that with officials and write to her so she has absolutely the correct information. But she will see if she's had a chance to look at it. The strategy includes those very big commitments in terms of the advanced manufacturing R&D budget for a whole range of sectors, putting in not just the money that perhaps wasn't as firm as it is now in the national finances, but also long-term plans in many of those sectors around quantum and advanced manufacturing and aerospace, 10-year settlements to give the kind of assurance and consistency I think we really need. But I'll get her the specific answer she needs.
Antonia Bance.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Representing Tipton, the birthplace of the first industrial revolution, I hugely welcome this industrial strategy and its 1.1 million good jobs. And I'm particularly pleased to see the Black Country singled out as a centre of clean energy industries. We recently welcomed the £45 million worth of investment in Echo Energy's new battery energy storage system at Ocker Hill in my constituency. And in particular, action on high energy prices is especially welcome. And I wonder if you might give us some more details about how soon we can expect it to be making a difference to businesses in our constituencies.
I very much thank my honourable friend for her question. I should say the birthplace of industrial revolution is somewhat contested by several of us as Labour MPs. We don't need a vote on that, but she's certainly got a rich history and a great future for her constituents, well represented by her since the election. I would say on energy prices, we all want action sooner rather than later. I say some parts of the programme I can implement more quickly than some others. I've got to do this in the proper way, and you have to let people consult on the absolute threshold that you will set. But I would say, of course, we're often dealing in my department with big either inward investment decisions or existing domestic business investment decisions, and if they've got certainty as to where they will get to in a short space of time, many of these are investments that pay back over obviously not just years but decades, that will make the difference. So I believe the benefits can be felt even sooner than the programme can be put in place, but I promise her I will stretch every sinew to get it in place as soon as we can.
Joshua Reynolds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Businesses have told me how important it is to have a front door for public finance. In the strategy, it references Innovate UK, the British Business Bank, the National Wealth Fund, UK Export Finance, Invest NI, the Scottish National Investment Bank, the Development Bank of Wales, Great British Energy and the Office for Investments. So does the Secretary of State believe that businesses know where the front door is for public finance and it's as simple as it could possibly be?
Well, I welcome the question from my honourable namesake. I hope he's still not getting my emails. I get a few of his. Try and help out where I can, to be honest, on those local issues. I would say he's right. I mean, there's a lot that we've inherited. There's a devolved landscape to this as well. People often ask why not. I think we had a conversation on the Select Committee about this. Why not bring them into one organisation? It's important to understand that they do key different parts of it. I can't remember what page it is on the industrial strategy, but there is this issue specifically addressed as to the different parts of the journey these different organisations represent. They're here to do different things. Of huge interest to me is the scale-up point, the Series B to C point. And I think people would recognise, again, there's a lot of capital in the world, but the question is, does it match the risk profile and opportunities of businesses in the UK? And I think we would all recognise, again, tremendous innovation in this country. But do we always get the long-term benefits of that scale-up happening in the UK rather than going abroad? We don't. And that is what we're seeking to fix. I think that is the fundamental mission we're all united behind.
Luke Charters.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Alongside the member for Aldershot, we published a report highlighting the persistent scale-up gap for defence SMEs. And while I welcome the increase of funds for NSIF, there's red tape there that's holding back investment to British single-use military technology. So will you look at clearing up some of that red tape to supercharge investment in British defence SMEs?
I very much welcome the question and the work my honourable friend has done. He, I think, has been an ally in our work to make sure there's no problems around the defence sector being seen as a legitimate source of business investment and economic activity. I think we recognise in the national interest why we need that, but we shouldn't in any way be squeamish about the contribution defence makes, because the deterrence value is a fundamental contribution to peace as well as to economic security. I can tell him in this strategy there's a commitment to increase by 50% the amount of the defence budget that goes specifically to SMEs. That's rise to £2.5 billion a year. So SMEs and diversifying the defence supply chain and creating those opportunities are absolutely a part of this strategy. And if he's got any red tape to show me that we need to get rid of, let's work together to get rid of it.
Kit Malthouse.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I draw attention to my entry in the register. I think this is the 6th industrial strategy that's been announced from that dispatch box since New Industry, New Jobs by Gordon Brown in 2009. And while they've all been filled with a box of chocolates selected by the Secretary of State to his or her preference, very often underpinned by a huge subsidy, not a single one of them has made any significant difference to the UK's growth rate. And that's because they're all missing a particular piece of the jigsaw. Can I urge the Secretary of State to recognise that you can build as many roads and bridges as you want, train as many young people as you like, pump as much money into the British Business Bank you want, unless you can find individuals to take a risk with their own capital, you're not going to get any investment. Unless they can see a return on that capital, they won't invest. So can I urge him, Madam Deputy Speaker, as we move towards the budget in November, to work with the Chancellor of the Exchequer to increase entrepreneurs' relief, cut capital gains tax, and increase or reduce the taxation on dividends so investors can see a return on their risk?
Well, I hesitate to say, but I think he's underestimating the number of strategies there have been in recent years. I think it's certainly more than 6. I think we were at 11 in the last decade or something like that. There have been 6 business secretaries in 5 years, though, so it's certainly far too many. I think we can all agree we need some long-term consistency in that area alone. His point on risk, I agree with. To us, that is one of the more thoughtful contributions to the low economic growth since the financial crisis, mainly under a Conservative government, that I've actually heard. And I think that attitude to risk has to be something as a country that we consider. I think we have to consider that in terms of regulation. And maybe our role as parliamentarians, when we ask regulators to fix every problem, to stop every bad thing happening, is that the right balance? Is that a reasonable request? Or should it be, of course, with that in mind, but proportionate to the performance of the economy? He asks some specific measures. We do have the lowest corporation tax in the G7 and a very competitive tax rate overall, but we're always seeking to improve that. We need both supply-side tools, fiscal changes, and a consistent long-term environment. That's what we're seeking to put in place.
Rachel Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This morning I visited Hariba Miro, which employs thousands of people across the West Midlands. It was a privilege to visit with the Prime Minister, the Secretary of State and the Chancellor. I'm sure the Secretary of State will agree with me that one of the highlights of that visit was the excitement on the apprentices' faces. After 14 years of low investment in the West Midlands under the party opposite, does the Secretary of State agree with me that this industrial strategy will deliver opportunities for young people and the manufacturing industries in North Warwickshire and Bedworth?
Yeah, It was a pleasure to see my honourable friend this morning with my honourable friends, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, and I was absolutely blown away by that facility, not just by the obvious big name investment from companies that were there, but it was the young people in particular. And of course, what we're trying to do here is deliver a strategy for business, and that requires them having the access to the pipeline of people and talent and skills that they need. But within that story, there are so many opportunities, so many lives, so many careers for young people. And I find that absolutely inspiring. I think having an offer that is both to the kind of apprentices and advanced manufacturing that we saw today, alongside pride in our service sectors, alongside pride in our creative sectors, what we're doing on defence, all of this is key to making sure there aren't just the things we need as an economy. There are opportunities, there are equities for young people, as there should be in every part of the UK, for the lives that they deserve.
Graham Leadbeater.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. While the UK Government announced a strategy that, as usual, barely gives Scotland any new news in the strategy, the Scottish Government under the SNP have just secured Scotland as the highest ranking destination for foreign investment outside of London and the South East for the 10th year in a row. So while the UK Government refused to see Scotland's potential, the rest of the world are lining up to invest in us. Think of what we will achieve when we are independent. Does the Minister accept? Does the Minister accept that the only obstacle to Scotland's success is the continuing devastation of a Brexit that we didn't vote for, and a UK Government that stubbornly refuses to see Scotland's potential?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, you can't please everyone, can you? That was... Oh, I'm depressed even listening to that question. But on the substance of his question, no, he's categorically wrong. Look at what we are proposing for clean energy and what that means for Scotland. Look at the new supercomputer in Edinburgh and what that means for tech and digital. Look at the creative industries and the brilliant opportunities there. Look at ambition on net zero and all the opportunities for investment in Scotland whilst cutting industrial energy bills. I mean, I will simply say on the independence question, whatever anyone else thinks about independence. And of course there are parts of this that respect, as you would expect, the devolution settlement. So skills is something we can only address in England. The money has gone to the Scottish Government for whatever they want to do to take that forward. That is just the nature of a national industrial strategy that respects the devolved settlement. On independence, it would be ruinous for the economy. You would, for instance, shed Scotland's renewable energy potential from the customer base in England. I believe at the time of the independence referendum, the SNP wanted a UK energy market anyway. So look, there are things, if he was being honest, if he was being candid, that he would recognise come from the massive strengths of the Union, come what may. And this is a strategy that speaks to building on those opportunities for every bit of the United Kingdom, Scotland especially. Scotland's economy could be described by the 8 high potential industrial strategy sectors in this document. So let's have a bit of optimism and hope for Scotland too.
Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome my honourable friend's statement today, a doubling of business investment by 2035, and particularly welcome the £4.3 billion of funding for advanced manufacturing sector, which will directly benefit the Amids factory in Renfrewshire, which is in Scotland. So can the Minister say a little bit more about how he will work hand in hand with the devolved administration in Holyrood to ensure that delivery of this strategy is tailored to local strengths?
Here, well, there's the true voice of Scotland. That's fantastic to hear that optimism and pride in the future. I mean, of course, she is right to say there are huge advantages for her constituents in this. A strategy that commits the kind of quantum of funding on a long-term committed basis on R&D, that cuts industrial energy prices, that does the kind of things across the board. I mean, there's so much that's part of this that, on each of those sectors to break down. I could be here for hours, Madam Deputy Speaker. You'd probably get upset with me if I read out each of the measures that are part of this. And as I said earlier to that question earlier, of course, when you're doing a national industrial strategy, you have to respect, I think this is entirely right, the devolved settlement. There are some supply-side areas of industrial strategy I don't have control over as the UK Secretary of State. I think it's right to reflect that, to build on where we can, and to work in partnership where we can. There are things I would like of the Scottish Government. I mean, think of Scotland's tremendous pedigree in civil nuclear power, all that investment denied to Scotland because of the policies of the Scottish Government. So I have my frustrations, but I will work together where we're able to do so to produce the best outcome for Scotland.
Select Committee Member Charlie Maynard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm going to quote here: "The UK has long been and remains a champion of free trade, if only, not on the big stuff and not on the important stuff. So leaving the EU's customs union single market has reduced UK GDP by between 2 and 4%. The deal with India is good news, but according to the UK government's own estimate, that adds 0.1% in the long term. So that's 20 to 40 times smaller. UK exports are down 13% since the Trade and Cooperation Agreement took effect. That impacts people in my constituency and all of yours. So when will government move faster to repair the enormous economic damage of a hard Brexit?
Well, I understand the point the honourable gentleman is making. This was the question that faced the nation at the time of the referendum. And if you leave a single market and a customs union, of course there will be economic consequences of that, particularly when you have free movement of people and what that produces in terms of the GDP figures. But that is a decision that the country took. And I would honestly say, let's look to the future, not the past. We could have this argument forever. We would have a situation where the kind of uncertainty for businesses that was created by never fundamentally coming to a settlement on Brexit would actually in itself become as big a problem as the kind of impact of leaving the single market that he talks about. And of course, if we were in a customs union without being part of the EU, I mean, can a G7 economy subcontract that area of policy entirely to other countries, not have control over key aspects of our economy? Honestly, I don't think that is reasonable. And I appreciate the Liberal position is almost certainly to go back into the European Union. There's consistency there. But I say again, that would mean, for instance, denying us the benefits of the India trade deal, the reduction of tariffs on agriculture and whiskey and cars, the lack of, we have no services access to India, or to the US agreement, which has saved tens of thousands of jobs.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the ambition behind the government's industrial strategy, a bold 10-year plan to unlock Britain's potential. So could the Minister outline how the strategy will align skills provision, particularly vocational and technical training, with the needs of our high-growth sectors such as advanced manufacturing and clean energy?
I'm getting an impression you would like more brevity from the front bench, Madam Deputy Speaker. So I would just say the skills packages will put more funding into the courses and the flexibilities required on those courses that matter, more capital funding for technical excellence colleges, and making sure that is available to every part of the UK.
David Reid.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was glad to hear Defence run through the Business Secretary's opening statement. So would he be able to tell us how much equity the reviewers of the Strategic Defence Review, the SDR, had in the compilation of the UK Modern Industrial Strategy?
Very much welcome the question. Yes, the Ministry of Defence has been a partner with this in the Defence Industrial Strategy, and it mirrors and closely aligns, as you would expect, with the Strategic Defence Review and the big increase in spending under this government.
Sonia Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I warmly welcome the statement. Can the Secretary of State outline what specific measures are being taken to ensure towns like Dudley, which actually is the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, receives its fair share of economic regeneration, job creation, and current infrastructure in cities isn't further invested in to generate growth?
Very much appreciate my honourable friend's question. She will see in the place section a whole range of tools that are available to both mayoral areas and non-mayoral areas that will help shape local economic plans. She will see measures to attract inward investment to strengthen the voice of that in all of the regions. And of course a whole range of policies that speak directly to business where, building on the tremendous history and expertise in her area, it'll be good news across the board.
Gregory Campbell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State will be aware of the future towns funds, one of which is in my constituency in Coleraine. And I want to see many more apprenticeships created through that Towns Fund. Will the modern industrial strategy that is unveiled today be flexible enough to allow funds like that to utilise through the strategy and get additional resources to make them even more successful than they've been so far?
I thank you for his question. There are parts of the skills package here which allow for short courses, more flexibility, more foundational apprenticeships. I think that's speaking exactly to the challenge he puts. And if there's any specific issues relating to his constituency, the Towns Fund, I'll get those answers for him. Pete Wrightson.
Annalise Stoltz.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I really welcome my right honourable friend's determination to reduce energy costs. He's heard the need from that from me, from many other colleagues from industry, and he's acted. And the previous government did not act. He's gripped onto this, and I welcome that because it will level the playing field for UK automotive, including BMW Cowley. Of course, we also need action to incentivise electric vehicle production that's domestic, not the purchase of foreign-made electric vehicles. So will that be included in the ZEV mandate refresh that's referred to in this strategy? Thank you.
I thoroughly welcome her question and thank her for all her support on our determination to make sure we have the competitive automotive sector that we all want to see. She's right to say the changes to the ZEV mandate were part of this. They were brought forward because of the pressing urgency. I wasn't happy with the situation I inherited from the Conservative Party, and we review very closely the level of consumer demand in that sector and are always willing to work with her and the tremendous business that she has in her constituency to make sure we're getting this country's markets to where they need to be.
Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Consort Frozen Food, who are based partly in Burgess Hill in my Mid-Sussex constituency, distribute ice creams across the UK. They do some distribution overseas as well, but I met with them recently because they really wanted to understand how best they can access more markets. So what advice does the Secretary of State have for Consort Frozen Foods? And I also wonder, given the comments of the Honourable Member for Arundel and South Downs, whether he'd like to reflect on the Honourable Member for Arundel and South Downs' first role since he was elected was actually as Boris Johnson's net zero business champion.
Well, I think there's no comment I can bring on that. I would say, well, first of all, I imagine that business is doing very well in the last few days. Anyone selling ice creams has probably had a pretty solid demand for its products. But she makes a really good point. There's a lot of support for exporting, and businesses don't often always know where to find it. The Business Growth Service, which is something that's going to be part of the Small Business Plan, is an attempt from government to bring together a single portal of information, to digitise, single digital login ideally, for all the interactions businesses have with the UK state. And I want to bring together the very considerable export offer we have, the Export Academy, and the expertise that we have in markets to have a very clear, so a member of Parliament like yourself visiting that business can simply say, this is where you need to go to, this is all the resource available, and I can raise any other issues with the Secretary of State.
Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm confused now. As chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Semiconductors, I welcome the formal recognition of this valuable sector within the new industrial strategy. I also welcome the plans for the future development of the sector, but as always, the devil will be in the detail. So I look forward to working with the Secretary of State to ensure the UK semiconductor sector develops to its maximum potential in the next few years as the essential foundation of so many of our vital industries like automotive, aviation and cybersecurity. Will he commit to regular ongoing discussions with the lead of the semiconductor strategy sector?
Thank you for her question and her championing of that sector, which of course is very significant for her constituency. It is part of an approach in the industrial strategy that recognises, yes, the industrial strategy 8 sectors that are very, very important, that have had an analytical base for focusing some attention on them, but it does cover those foundational sectors as well. So as she's already said, other sectors would include steel, chemicals, critical minerals, composites, materials, electricity networks, ports and construction. We need the foundations in place if we're going to have the kind of success that we're looking at, and I look forward to continuing to work with her on that.
Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This 138-page industrial strategy highlights the key problem facing British industry, which is high energy prices. And the Secretary of State is putting in place some measures to reduce those. But surely, Secretary of State, you could do that earlier than 2027 by removing some of the green levies of net stupid zero, removing those sooner. And where will energy prices, Secretary of State, come down for all British industry?
When we get off gas.
Here, well, I almost thought he welcomed part of the strategy there. That took me a little by surprise. Yes, we're going to make and do decisive actions to reduce the cost of industrial energy prices. As I've said earlier, there are some things I can do quicker than others. The supercharger scheme can be made more generous in the short term. Others require a longer process. I'll work as hard as I can to deliver that. But I would say to him, what I would hope he would recognise is the core reason we are such an outlier is our exposure to fossil fuel prices, including gas, both for heating and for electricity prices. And to go down a route where we'll be exposed to that in the long term without the kind of ambition we need to make sure we have secure, clean supplies of energy in the UK. I think, to be frank, the Honourable Gentleman should listen to business a bit more. They tell him everything he needs to address this problem.
Louise Jones.
Kicking nobody off. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Because in my constituency of North East Derbyshire, businesses are heavily reliant on great connections and making sure that our young people can access the skills that they need. So I really welcome this industrial strategy, which recognises the many different aspects that go into supporting our local economy. Could the Secretary of State expand further on what we can do to support better transport connections and better skills pipeline for the young people in my constituency?
Well, I welcome her question, and it speaks directly to the challenges that we are facing, as well as the action on energy bills. We will make sure there is a priority service for businesses to get the grid connections that they need. That's one of the biggest barriers to investment. The investment in skills as part of that. Something I'm particularly excited about, Madam Deputy Speaker, is we're going to spend £41 million to make sure on every mainline train service there is decent Wi-Fi by using the latest satellite technology. If I was coming to Parliament just to announce that, I'd be quite happy, if I'm being honest.
Hopefully the rail line that takes me into my constituency will be the first on the list there. Yeah, Mike Martin.
Deputy Speaker, there's much to like here, and I particularly like the reduction in energy costs between 20 and 25%. If I could just push him a little bit here, when does he think that, so that industry can plan, when does he think that these energy reduction, 25%, when's that going to happen?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend has just told me it's 141 million, not 41 million, to put Wi-Fi on the trains. It's been quite an exciting day. I think it's quite important I put that on the record. Energy prices, yes, it's one of the fundamental parts of this strategy. As I say, the supercharger can be put in place by 2026, financial year 2026-27. The British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme will have to take a longer process and a legislative process as well. So that would be 2027, the year after that, financial year after that. I know how important this is, but of course, once those plans are in place, businesses will have the certainty that that is the cost that they will be able to face, and they can plan their business plans and their investment decisions based upon that.
Select Committee Member Rosie Writing.
Speaker, I welcome the Government's ambition to double business investment by 2035, but on the Business and Trade Committee we've heard time and time again from businesses that they face barriers when it comes to unlocking the investment they need to scale up. So can the Minister set out how the Government intends to support access to scale-up finance so our economy benefits from our innovation? Thank you.
Here, well, I thank her for her work on the Business and Trade Select Committee. I always enjoy my sessions with them, as my ministerial team do as well. She's right to say that finance is a huge issue. Scale-up finance is the particular challenge. We intend to use the British Business Bank, as I've said, with much greater financial capacity to work directly with fund managers focused on the on the scale-up part of the finance journey. And I know how big a problem this is. I think there's a lot of capital in the world. We've got to address this particular stage, and these are real measures that will seek to do that.
Victoria Collins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I do absolutely welcome, and finally having industrial strategy for this country is very exciting. And in terms of driving innovation, absolutely support that larger business, British Business Bank, and making sure we invest in scale-ups. I would say, though, we need to make sure it's about long-term investment and making sure incentives are there to de-risk investment too. But what I really want to focus on is this about digital and technology businesses, because as much as I welcome training 1 million young people, it's not just about young people. I have businesses like BT, Sage, Xero saying they work with small businesses who need to improve their AI and tech adoption. So we'd like to ask what the government is doing to help support them and people of all ages.
I thoroughly agree with her. It is an exciting day, and also that the challenge is long-termism, is long-term consistency and reliability in a way, frankly, this Parliament and previous governments have not supplied. We've got to address that is a key voice from business to us that we need to address. I agree with her. I mean, on the reason why digital and tech skills are one of the prominent features of the skills interventions of the industrial strategy is to do what she says. It's a significant funding package and a significant partnership with business themselves, who are telling us they want to work with government, want to work with young people and to reskill people. I think there's more we can do. I think this is the start of that, and I'd be very keen to work with her and any colleague who sees the urgency and the benefits this could bring.
Questions are far too long and the Secretary of State is far too generous with his responses. Let's try and nip that in the bud. Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. York Central, our biggest brownfield site, will release 12,500 new jobs in advanced digital rail, in the digital creative sector, as well as in the bioeconomy mentioned in your brilliant industrial strategy. Will the Secretary of State, however, ensure that innovation hubs at the centre of these cluster developments are able to come on stream and get the funding they need in order to unlock these sites?
tremendously excited by the opportunity that she outlines. There are many tools you will recognise in here, whether it is the funding for innovation, the funding for local economic development, particularly the new Strategic Sites Accelerator. For the first time, land assembly, getting the grid and planning in place so we have these opportunities for the kind of inward investment offers that we receive. She's got a very exciting local proposition there, but we need more of them, and I'm really looking forward to working with her on that.
Paula Denyer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to welcome the investment in skills announced today. What seems to be missing, though, is a commitment to give wraparound support to the 3 million workers in the UK currently in high-carbon industries who will need reskilling and retraining in order to make the most of the green jobs boom. So, can the Minister give us any information on what's planned for those workers specifically? And does he agree that the fossil fuel giants should be the ones shouldering the cost of that support?
I thank her for her question and a slightly positive tone around that. I do believe that the skills challenge for the UK is not just one of making sure there are opportunities for young people, but reskilling people is a part of that. There are some interesting things inherited from the previous government that we've taken forward that will allow us to do it. I would just say to her, when she sort of condemns people who work in what she calls fossil fuel industries, I mean, these are, well, perhaps condemn is too strong a word, but I would ask her to recognise we have sectors of our own economy that are, relative to other parts of our own economy, high emissions industries. But on an international basis, they're very competitive. And if we simply outsourced those emissions to other parts of the world and imported those products, I don't think that would be a problem. There is a lot of green policy that, frankly, does propose that we do that. So that's not the approach the government's taking. We're ambitious about those sectors for the transition, and this industrial strategy is key to making that happen.
Pamela Nash.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome this ambitious and exciting industrial strategy from my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, and aligning vocational and technical training to the skills that are needed by our industries is just plain common sense. However, in my constituency in Motherwell, Wishaw and Carluke, businesses are often telling me that they can't access the skills they need in workers, and young people in those retraining are telling me that they can't access the courses they need. So can I ask the Secretary of State, is his department speaking with the Scottish Government in preparation for launching this strategy today?
Yes, we are. Our officials are in close contact with all of our partners in all of the devolved governments. We respect policy differences through devolution, but I do think the kind of things we're addressing here are of interest to every part of the UK.
Max Wilkinson.
Deputy Speaker, can I congratulate the Business Secretary, Secretary of State for Science and Technology, the Minister for AI and Digital as well, for listening to me over the last 11.5 months and including in the sector plan for digital and technologies, the Golden Valley development at West Cheltenham. It's going to unlock £1 billion worth of investment in cybersecurity and defence, which is crucial to our nation. Will ministers now monitor progress in planning and make sure that if a little bit of extra support is needed to get the infrastructure over the line to deliver that growth, that it will happen?
I very much welcome his support and the contribution his local area can make to this. In some areas, I think we have a lot of good things going on, but it does have to happen faster, and we have to make sure we execute the plans we have in place. That sounds exactly like the sort of challenge in his area we should commit to.
Alice Snell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, Ceramics UK have described today's modern industrial strategy as disappointing. And candidly, I share that disappointment when it comes to that sector. The one reference to ceramics in there is historic and geographic and nothing about industry. For months with my colleagues from Stoke-on-Trent North and South, we've been pointing out the immediate needs of a sector that employs thousands of people in our city. And yet today, nothing on gas pricing, nothing on electricity pricing, no access to the supercharger scheme, and we're instead given an IOU for 2027. So can I ask the Secretary of State what message I can take home to Stoke-on-Trent this week about what's in this industrial strategy that will give them the help and the support that they need today, rather than having to wait for an IOU post-dated to next year?
I say to him, I think Ceramics UK are misplaced in that criticism because, first of all, ceramics is recognised as a foundational sector, as part of the materials foundational sector in the strategy. Their principal request is about energy prices. There are some ceramics businesses, I accept not that many, but there are some ceramics businesses who get the supercharger, who'll get the more generous rate. But fundamentally, because a lot of those businesses don't match the intensity test, which the supercharger is based on, a sectoral then an individual business test. That's exactly why the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme has been designed in such a way so they will benefit from it, and that will be a game changer to them. On gas prices, there aren't the same policy tools around gas prices, but of course we can see that gas prices are projected to fall from the very significant level that they have been at for future financial years.
Glenys Meddy.
The industrial strategy has a commitment to increase R&D to drive growth. However, Wales has consistently missed out on its population share of UK R&D funding for years, receiving around 2% compared to the 5% we should be receiving. What is the government doing to ensure that Wales gets its fair share under this strategy, given that research and development is vital for Welsh business to grow?
I absolutely recognise that all of the initiatives that we're putting forward today, where they apply to all across the UK, every area deserves its fair share of that funding. Of course, many of the policies that I am responsible for in the Department of Business and Trade disproportionately benefit Wales. I mean, the Clean Steel Fund and the money going to Port Talbot is much more than the population share that would otherwise be attributed to it. And that's because there are brilliant strengths in Wales that I want to support. And when I look at this strategy, whether it is around aerospace and Airbus, whether it's automotive and Toyota, whether it's the creative industries, professional and business services, financial services, there's so much here that will benefit Wales because of the brilliant strengths in Wales. And it's something to be very optimistic about, and I'd be very, very confident about what this strategy will mean for Wales, whilst, of course, respecting that devolved settlement.
Tim Rocker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I congratulate my right honourable friend. With over 5,000 Macclesfield jobs dependent on AstraZeneca, can I welcome the Health Data Research Centre, the slashing of trial times and the focus on life sciences? Could he set out how he's supporting DHSC colleagues to further deliver for life sciences by finalising a realistic settlement on the commercial agreement over pricing of medicine, VPAG in particular? It's very important to my constituents.
Very much welcome my honourable friend's question. And he's right to say for the life sciences sector plan, VPAG is a very significant item. It's what the industry itself is looking for resolution on. The life sciences sector will be formally launched by my honourable friends, my cabinet colleagues, to match the anniversary of the birthday of the NHS. But I can tell him talks with industry are ongoing. We're all trying to find a settlement to that. And I do believe it's possible to do so. And I think we should all recognise the economic benefits of the sector that he has very carefully outlined for his constituency.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I do welcome the industrial strategy, and I want to push the Minister on skills. Harrogate College often tell me that they struggle to access funding for technical and vocational training that meets the needs of local business. And in the next academic year, in just a couple of months' time, they'll be facing a £90,000 reduction in the devolved adult skills budget from the new Labour Mayor. So will the Secretary of State clarify how the Skills Mission Fund will work in practice for towns like mine, and whether it will be genuinely led by local economic needs, not Westminster targets?
Yeah. I recognise the case that he is making, which is some of the courses that we need that are central to our economy. So engineering is a good example. They're more expensive to put on. You need the capacity to put those courses on. And that is why when I talk about a funding package, it's to deliver on those absolute very things. And it's business-led, it's needs-led, and the kind of work he's talking about at Harrogate College, I would expect to feel the benefits of this.
Paul Wall.
Rochdale Training provides local apprenticeships in engineering and other skills we desperately need, but they work with local employers to do that. But their Chief Executive, Jill Nodge, told me that today's announcement of £1.2 billion in extra funding for training is warmly welcome, as are the new foundation apprenticeships. So will he join me in praising the work of Rochdale Training? And can I also urge him to look closely at Hopwood Hall College's bid to be one of the North West Technical College of Excellence when it comes to construction?
I very much thank him for his question. I think FE has had a difficult time over the last few years, and we're starting to see the kind of investment that will make a difference. We need more business input into skills policy. I think the kind of work that he is talking about, more than happy to perhaps come up the road from Staley Bridge one Friday to Rochdale and maybe have that conversation in person with him. And there'll be, I think, many bids within Greater Manchester for the capital that we're putting forward, and I'd very much look forward to looking at that case.
David Chadwick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd also like to commend the Government for reintroducing an industrial strategy. An industrial strategy is crucial for spreading good jobs out across the United Kingdom. In my constituency, the hospitality industry is crucial for our local economy, boosting tourism, creating jobs and helping with rural regeneration, but is struggling with sky-high energy costs. What is the Secretary of State doing to ensure that SMEs in all sectors of our economy, particularly pubs and restaurants, receive better support with their energy costs?
Well, Well, I thank him for his question. I would say, if you look at the impact of the kind of inward investment that this industrial strategy is seeking to deliver more of, take the incredible investment by Universal in that huge, the biggest theme park in Europe in Bedfordshire. That will create, I think, 8,000 jobs in hospitality. So people should recognise there's a direct contribution between what we're doing here, what we're trying to get more of, and the kind of benefits he is talking about. We've set a target for 50 million visitors by 2030. So these issues are absolutely represented within here. And as I say, some of the issues that are not covered here will be in the small business plan, which will come out imminently next month to follow up on this announcement today.
Noah Law.
Speaker, which I know you share in critical minerals as the APPG chair, and I welcome this strategy's recognition of the role that regional clusters like Cornwall can play. So given Cornwall's resurgent critical minerals ecosystem, what steps is the Secretary of State taking to ensure that the region is at the forefront of secure domestic supply chains and that we benefit directly from that growth in green industrial jobs?
Yeah, that is a great question. Madam Deputy Speaker, I remember our conversations about critical minerals, but they are a key enabler. They'll be even more important in future. He will know some of the National Wealth Fund's initial investments have been into different businesses in his region in critical minerals because of the importance of that part of the UK to this strategy. We need more of that. We need more international cooperation on critical minerals as well, but he should be rest assured the British Business Bank, the National Wealth Fund are specifically focused on this because it's so important and there'll be big benefits for his area from that.
Samantha Niblett.
Mr. Speaker, as the founder of Labour Women in Tech, I heartily welcome the industrial strategy's ambitious goals to scale our tech sector and tech workforce. On the 15th of July in Parliament, I'm hosting We Are Tech Women and Oliver Wyman for the launch of the Lovelace report, which has identified that there are between 40 to 60,000 female professionals leaving the tech sector annually or seeking advancement opportunities elsewhere, and that's well over £1 billion of economic opportunity by better supporting our existing skilled workforce. So does the Secretary of State agree with me that both inspiring new and supporting great existing talent and diverse teams across all demographics is fundamental to maximising returns on our industrial strategy investments and securing the UK's position as a world-leading technology nation?
Yeah, I thoroughly agree. It's brilliant to see her in Parliament. She's been a trailblazer on these issues, and I recognise the case that she has put forward extremely well, and I recognise this is a core economic priority for the United Kingdom, and it's great to see her as an advocate of that on these green benches.
Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Madam. I think my bronchitis is starting to get me a little in 2023, that it was 40% more productive and wages were 15% higher than the UK average. So I'm pleased to say this industrial strategy betting on a winner with clean energy. I'm also pleased to see the announcement that government will be slashing the cost of energy for industry, but would he tell me and my constituents in Bournemouth and people across the South West what this industrial strategy will do for the South West?
Well, I'm more than happy to tell him we have breakdowns for every region going to every colleague because there's so much for each part of the UK. I couldn't possibly do it justice from the dispatch box. But on his points on clean energy, there is so much money coming into the UK and more in future. It would be crazy to turn our backs on that. This is a major economic opportunity as well as being about a safe, reliable, clean supply of energy for the UK, which is the basis of all economic activity. And we can do that whilst reducing energy bills for industry. That is exactly the kind of consistent approach I think this country has needed for some time.
My apologies, Jim Shannon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, you're very kind. Thank you. We got there, Dan. Can I thank very much the Secretary of State for his statement, full of positivity, and everyone here deep down welcomes it, and if not, well, they should. Well done, Minister, and well done, this government. Whilst I welcome the news that more than 7,000 British businesses are set to see their electricity bills slashed by up to 25% by 2027, it is clear that there is much more support as needed, such as a reduction, can I kindly say this, reduction of corporation tax, especially for Northern Ireland business, which borders the Republic of Ireland, which has half the corporation rate of 12.5%. So will the Secretary of State discuss with his Cabinet colleagues to provide greater support for our industries in Northern Ireland? Thanks so much.
Thoroughly welcome his question. I appreciate his support and kind words for this. There is a great deal that will benefit, as I say, every part of the UK. He knows I think I take my responsibilities very seriously for Northern Ireland, particularly the complexities of trade policy and the Windsor Agreement and what that means. Now, it has to work for the benefit of everyone in Northern Ireland. Now, he will know the UK has the lowest corporation tax of any G7 country, so it's quite an ask to reduce corporation tax still further. But I understand the genuine competitive pressures of being in business in Northern Ireland if you're close to the border, and the mobility of capital and talent and how that is affected by that. It means we all have a responsibility to make sure UK government policy, working with our colleagues in the Northern Ireland Executive, works to the maximum benefit, is consistent, is coordinated. And I can tell him I'm regularly in touch with my Northern Irish colleagues and regularly visiting. I'm planning a visit right now. I might even try and look him up and maybe do a visit to his constituency to address some of these issues.
Luke Myers.
Can I welcome the focus in this industrial strategy for the Tees Valley region, and in particular our clean energy sector, which represents some 8,800 jobs today and scaling up dramatically into the future. But as I said in September, this will only work if we have alignment on skills. So can I ask when we expect to see the clean energy workforce strategy, and what steps the government will take to align skills into the future?
I thank him for his question. I think one thing that is really important for colleagues to understand is, as well as the publication of the Modern Industrial Strategy today, we have now with this a tool for other government departments, non-economic government departments, to filter their own policy decisions through in a way which is consistent and to the benefit of UK business. Now that is everything from, for instance, the Home Office will publish its exemptions to the changes to the more restrictive skilled worker visa in relation to what these sectors need, and there'll be, for the first time, decisions made through that lens. He mentions a specific piece of work from my colleagues in Desnes about the workforce strategy that they are committed to. I don't have a timescale for him on that. I will make sure I or my colleagues write to him about that. But the prize here is genuinely joined-up government. It hasn't always been easy in the preparation of this strategy, I will be frank with him, but is the kind of consistent approach to policy, to competition, to competitiveness in the UK, which is very, very important.
Reid.
Deputy Speaker, can I welcome this ambitious industrial strategy and commend the Secretary of State for the long-term thinking, something that we didn't see under the previous government. East Kilbride, in my constituency, Scotland's first new town, was born out of an effective post-war industrial strategy. But over recent years, my constituents have been given false hope from both the SNP and Tory governments, with big promises and little delivery. So can I ask the Secretary of State to give my constituents reassurance that this time it will deliver and will get growth and jobs?
Well, I'm grateful to her for her question. I'd be frank with her constituents. I think in the past we have seen documents produced by governments that don't have much longevity. I think we've seen documents that have a lot of analysis but don't necessarily have real measures behind them. And that's why the strategy we've launched today on energy, on finance, on skills, on the powers local areas need, on how those programmes work consistently across government. This is always about creating the conditions for the private sector to thrive in. But I think anyone looking at the big challenges facing UK business today, UK industry, would see those addressed in this document.
Catherine Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Worryingly, only 9% of secondary vocational learners are currently studying engineering, manufacturing and construction, compared to the OECD average of 32%. So I warmly welcome that this industrial strategy confirms £100 million investment to support engineering skills in England. So could he outline how this funding will help meet skill shortages and deliver growth across the country, including in engineering cities like Derby?
Yeah, well, Derby has an incredible pedigree in engineering skills, and I agree with the case she has made so strongly. I can tell her, put some funding from my own department into that goes from the Department of Education, specifically around engineering, because I think the shortages are so acute and the opportunities are so great. These are great jobs, great careers, great lives for young people or anyone transferring into that sector. It's about more funding to put the courses on. It's about more flexibility in the kinds of courses that can be run, more capacity in terms of the technical excellence colleges that are there, and of course making that available in all parts of the country. But you couldn't get a better pedigree than the Honourable Lady has in Derby, and that's a great success story, I think, for this country and for her local area too.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome the comprehensive and business-friendly UK modern industrial strategy, the investment in Britain, in British people and in British businesses. Madam Deputy Speaker, Portsmouth is home to the world-class defence and innovative cluster. It has strength in maritime, space, drones, autonomous systems and assets like kinetics, Airbus, His Majesty's Royal Navy Base, Griffin Marine, Ports of Aviation and Solent Freeport. Madam Deputy Speaker, I could continue the list with so many more brilliant businesses in my city, but time will not allow. So, can my right honourable friend say how Invest 2035 can work alongside future devolution and local government reorganisation to help unlock growth, investment, skills and jobs for ports of businesses and residents?
Well, I thank her for her question, and I think it's very important that we show the British people that the added investment, the huge increase in defence spending of this government will see real economic benefits for them, opportunities for their family, as well, of course, as fulfilling that core function of national security. She mentions devolution. We have measures in here for local areas where they have mayoral leads or whether they don't, on innovation, on mayoral growth funds. Many building on, I have to say, the very successful work of Andy Burnham, my Labour mayor in Greater Manchester, and the West Midlands as well, Richard Parker, who've done absolutely brilliant things. They're the most developed, mature mayoral areas, and we can see what has worked in those places, and it really is starting to work. So let's have more of that across every bit of the UK, tailored for local needs with the right tools those political leaders need.
Alan Strickland.
Deputy Speaker, can I welcome this incredibly ambitious industrial strategy, but can I ask specifically about our high-tech SMEs? At Net Park in Sedgefield, we've got a cluster of over 40 businesses making satellite components, medical imaging equipment and other high-tech products. But as the Minister knows, too often they struggle to get private finance. They've struggled in the past to get government innovation funding. How will this strategy really put the rocket boosters up behind high-tech SMEs in regions like the North East?
Yeah, well, I always take a close interest in success stories from the northeast of England, and what he outlines there is incredibly exciting. I think the kind of SME high-tech cluster he's talking about will benefit in many ways from each of the sector plans, whether they're in advanced manufacturing, creative industries, defence. There's access to finance provisions for them in this strategy. There's the dedication of resources from, for instance, the defence budget for that sector. So I would say those businesses are set to fly. And with this industrial strategy, he's got a real chance to build and communicate the opportunities for them over the next few years.
Vinnie Ward.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I really warmly welcome the new modern industrial strategy today, and in particular all that it has to offer Scotland. And I also welcome the Business Secretary's personal enthusiasm and energy about the potential for growth in Scotland. What a contrast to the SNP, who can't help but talk Scotland down. I particularly welcome today the good news for skills and innovation, which will benefit Scotland, and also for reduced energy and particularly electricity costs for our key manufacturing sites in Scotland. As I've discussed with my right honourable friend, the ethylene plant at Mossmoran is a large employer in my constituency, supporting hundreds of high-skilled, well-paid jobs in Fife. Can the Business Secretary outline how this industrial strategy and other government action will back the chemicals industry and the jobs it supports?
Well, I thoroughly thank her for her question. I think it was about a year ago she and I were on the campaign trail in her constituency and visiting businesses with the message we would implement a strategy of this kind. And I do say to her, I do think the Scottish economy mapped against our 8 industrial strategy sectors, it could be a description of Scottish success, and we should be excited about that. In relation to the ethylene cracker at Mossmoran, very important facility. She will know, because of high gas prices across Europe, all of the crackers across Europe are under some degree of distress. I've been in conversations with my honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Scotland, about this and with other crackers in Scotland that are affected by those high gas prices. We continue that work. More generally, the chemical sector is recognised as a key foundational sector in this strategy. It has had a lot of pressure in recent years, and we're seeking to improve that business environment.
Lola McAvoy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is mint for British industry. In my region, we have a proud history of making world-class products and exports. We make trains, and this government has secured the future of Hitachi at Aycliffe. We make cars, and this government has negotiated a tariff deal to protect the Nissan plant in Sunderland. And we make hugely advanced bioindustry products like the COVID-19 vaccine at the Centre for Process Innovation in my constituency in Darlington. As the chair of the APPG on industrial strategy, I know the finance solutions and energy subsidies will be roundly welcomed by business up and down the country. But can the Secretary of State outline how this strategy will lead to more highly paid, highly skilled job opportunities for workers in constituents like mine who've seen more plants shut than saved over the last 14 years?
Well, I thoroughly thank her for her question, for all her work and her role in Parliament advocating for these issues. There's a huge amount in this for the sector she outlines. I was very proud of the work we did with Hitachi, but on cars, it's the tariffs, it's the Drive 35 programme, it's energy costs, it's the ZEV mandate, and we'll make any changes we need for a competitive position. This is fundamentally about, yes, what business needs, but better paying jobs in every part of the UK, and her part of the world in particular will stand to